All right, welcome everybody. Does that work? Okay. We are gathered as a Provo Municipal Council here on Tuesday, March 10th, 2020 at 5:43 p.m. City Center Municipal Council Chambers, 351 West Center, Provo. We apologize for the late beginning, and we appreciate your patience. Actually, am I supposed to announce that we're beginning as the redevelopment agency? That's what it says here. Okay, all right. Okay, this meeting is being broadcast live on the web on the Provo City Council YouTube channel, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. The council requests that attendees help maintain the decorum of the meeting by silencing electronic devices, being respectful to others, and refraining from applause or other outbursts during the proceedings of the meeting. I'll begin with a roll call. Travis, I think that's you.
Travis Hoban.
David Shipley.
Bill Fillmore.
George Handley.
David Harding.
Dave Sewell.
Shannon Ellsworth.
Mayor Kafusi.
Wayne Parker.
All right, we'll begin with an opening prayer, which will be given by Susan Robinson, after which we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance provided by Emily Southwick.
Our Father in heaven, we thank you so much that we were able to work together and work as a community to try to better our community. We thank you for these council members and those that are serving in our city, and we thank you so much for the good judgment that they have learned and how they've worked so hard to get the understanding of what's going on and better our community. Please bless us with thy spirit. Bless us with a spirit of love and concern for each other, and bless us and guide us that we can keep the city the way it is and the way it will continue to grow in a good way. We love thee so much, Father, and we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. As indicated on the screen, a required public hearing will be, or shortly will be on the screen, I assume. A required public hearing will be held for certain agenda items prior to council action. After each such item has been presented, time to comment will be provided for all those who wish to speak. For items that do not require a public hearing, public comment will still be taken following presentation of that item, but limited to 10 minutes. At this time, 15 minutes have been set aside for any open public comment period, which is intended to allow comment on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Persons who speak during this time to an item that is on the agenda will not normally be afforded a second opportunity to speak during the comment period specific to that item. During any public comment period, each speaker will generally be limited to 2 minutes. Additional time may be given to individuals specifically invited to speak, such as applicants, neighborhood chairs, or others who may be representing additional persons. Please begin your comments, again, for any item that is not on the agenda tonight by stating your name and city of residence. Due to noticing requirements, no formal action will be taken in this meeting on matters that do not appear on the agenda. So those with comments are invited to approach the podium.
Thank you. My name is Doug Gale. I live in Provo, Utah, 1319 Grand Avenue. And the reason I came today to approach the council and the mayor is to thank you for your efforts in trying to do the very best job that you can. Recently, you voted on the brew pub. It was quite a controversial issue, but I read and listened and participated in your surveys, and I appreciate the effort that you put in, that you use the city staff to research, that you research the community, and then you voted. And I appreciate each one of you for your vote, whether you're for it or against it. And I think that's going to be your lot as a council, that you can do your very best job to vote for those principles that you think and those actions which will best help our city. As mentioned in the prayer, you have difficult decisions to make. But I want to go on record saying thank you for your votes for and against. There'll be many more like that, but thank you for your efforts in this behalf. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gale. Any other comments from the public on any items that are not on the agenda tonight? All right, well, we'll bring it back to the council, and actually, if there's no objection, we will now recess as the, wait a minute, don't we have, what about our water board? That's after. Oh, that's after, okay. If there's no objection, we'll now recess as the Municipal Council of Provo and reconvene as the Redevelopment Agency of Provo by unanimous consent. There are 4 items on the consent agenda, all dealing with agreements between the Redevelopment Agency and Provo School District, Central Utah Water Conservancy District, Provo City, and Utah County, respectively, with regard to the Provo Medical School Community Reinvestment Project area. And I regret to mention that I was supposed to pass this over to Dave Sewell. So Dave Sewell, as the chair of the Redevelopment Agency, will take over. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it's been a little while since we've done a consent agenda. My understanding is that these are items that are non-controversial, or at least are in our opinion, and that don't require a public hearing. Do you want to add anything, Mr. Schrecken?
Yeah, and I would say that's correct. The only thing I would suggest from the notes I have here is that because you didn't, because of time during the work meeting, you didn't get to have an overview of those 4 items. And I would suggest that we invite Mr. Walter up just to give us a quick overview and make sure you still want to keep it on the consent agenda and then pass them that way.
That sounds good. Is Mr. Walters here? Okay.
Mr. Chair, members of the agency board, good evening. The items that are on the agenda tonight are the interlocal agreements between the redevelopment agency and the main taxing entities, i.e. the city of Provo, Provo School District, Utah County, and the Water Conservation District. For the benefit of everyone, the interlocal agreements are the mechanism by which we receive a portion of the increase in taxes that would normally accrue to those taxing entities. But by virtue of being within a a community reinvestment area, which you established a couple of meetings ago, the agency is able to capture a portion of that increase subject to the approval of the individual taxing entities. And this item before you tonight approves those agreements and sends us out to talk to the entities and to get their approval as well. So the way the agreements are structured, they allow for a cap either in terms of time or in terms of amount collected. So whichever cap hits first, the agreement would terminate, and then the taxing entity would be then entitled to its full share of the tax increase, or the increase in the taxes, I should say. The other thing to note that in these particular resolutions, there are benefit finding resolutions or benefit findings that are being made as a result of us using a portion of this tax increment flow to pay for the enhancements at the golf course that we had previously discussed. We've had conversations with the school district. They are supportive of this, and we've reached out to the county as well and are continuing to have a dialogue with them. So that's a brief overview. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Walter.
Thank you.
Is there any council member who wishes to remove any of these items from the consent agenda for discussion? Seeing none. Actually, can you remind me of one other thing? Do we typically call for a vote on the consent agenda, or do we do it by unanimous consent?
That's a great question, that it's been so long since we've used the consent agenda. Because we phrased it on the agenda as being an implied motion, I would call for a vote.
Okay. All in favor? And that is unanimous.
Okay.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the action agenda, item number 5, which is a resolution of the Redevelopment Agency of Provo adopting the project plan area for the mixed community reinvestment project area. And is there any, Mr. Walter, would you like to cover this item for us?
Good evening again. So the item tonight discusses the former Plum Tree Plaza. And as you know, we have been working for a time with the developer, Westport Capital, out of Irvine, California. And we've been working with them they have acquired the property. They are looking to redevelop it. There are some sewer issues on this property that we would need to that they need to address, and that actually would help us further downstream. And so we are looking to use the tax increment that would be generated through the redevelopment of the site for helping to pay for a portion of those sewer improvements. So you may remember that in past times, around 2006, 2009, the Shopko store was open, and this entire area was part of the Plum Tree Plaza. And so if you can, I don't know if you can notice this on the map, but there are certain parcels that it would not be a portion of the redevelopment project area. So the portions that are in green are the portions that are proposed to be in the project area. So tonight we have the plan for that, as well as for the budget for the project area. As it stands right now, the property is kind of in my opinion, kind of in the worst possible state. It's half demolished, so it's not fully clear, it's not fully developed. It kind of is, and I'm sure there have been many members of the public who have felt it's kind of in a state of limbo. And I know that the developer is anxious to get going, and they are working to move this forward. And there's a water canal that needs to be relocated. They would like to start that as soon as possible. And there's also a desire for us to get started on upsizing not upsizing, but rather designing the sewer line that would run along, I believe it's 600 West, right, Dave? Yeah, so we're proposing a 2,300 linear feet of an 18-inch sewer line. And if it's determined that the city needs to upsize that, then the city would pay for a portion of it. But the developer is going to be paying for that. Tax increment's going to help reimburse them for a portion of that. So tonight's item, you would be adopting a resolution approving the plan, the proposed budget, and then there's an ordinance later on for the city council to adopt. Those items will then be sent forward to the state and to the county so that they can create the project area, the boundaries, and we can begin the process of delineating that for the flow of tax increment that would come in future tax years. The developer is ready to start. They have plans to, they have bonds that they have to submit, and they will submit those expeditiously and move forward. You may remember that you've taken action on this parcel, this area previously, to change a portion of it to a residential zone, which would be the back portion that kind of fronts along the river. There would be about 75,000 square feet of retail that would be closer to University Parkway, as well as a 124-room hotel. That would be part of the redevelopment of this project. So that's the developers here if you need to ask a question, and I'm available for any questions as well.
Mr. Harding.
Thank you. What year was used to establish the baseline? What state was the property in?
The base year that we were proposing came out of the latest tax roll. So it would have been the 2019 tax roll.
Okay.
That would have been the base year that should have been on there, the 21 million. So if you look at this, I know it's my spreadsheets, and so they tend to be not easy on the eyes, and I apologize for that, but there is quite a bit of data. It's important to note, I think, also here that through this process that, has a new redevelopment or community reinvestment area, this will generate housing set aside. So as a result of changes in the Utah Reinvestment Agency law, new project areas set aside 10% of the tax increment that they collect for low and moderate income housing. So that can be used to help preserve or enhance or add to a community's stock of low to moderate income housing. This is a rendering of what they propose to put on the project. As you can see, I mentioned in the back, they're talking about the residential in the back, the hotel along the property. They have talked about the possibility of maybe switching the hotel so it could engage the river more at this point. It is an opportune time or an opportune location for them to do that. And then they are also adding roughly 75,000 square feet of additional retail space, commercial space.
Are there any other questions?
I have a question. So they're not committed to this site plan right now. This is just their first draft?
It's a little more than a first draft, but I don't believe that they've finalized the plan. So.
Okay. Is this the site plan that's referenced in these documents?
The site plan, I believe, that's referenced in the document refers more to just the physical layout and not not the proposed development.
Okay.
So just the map showing, this map, the green one with the red outline.
The delineation of the project,
Correct.
not the
Yes, ma'am.
site plan.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then a site plan would continue through our typical development processes. Okay. Well, I would agree with you in your previous statement in saying that it would be preferable wherever possible to orient and engage the river in these kinds of developments. It's a hidden jewel.
Yeah, I know they had several conversations with Brigham Young University about the possibility of cooperation and working with the film studios behind them, and it just didn't pan out. So.
All right, thank you, Mr. Walter.
Thank you.
Are there any members of the public who wish to comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and bring it back to the agency for any discussion. Mr. Harding?
I'm not comfortable. I guess I'm not comfortable with the idea, and the whole point of tax increment financing is projects are proposed and we give them the difference between what that property was bringing in and what it will bring in based on the project. So to get partway through a project to demolish viable businesses and I mean, I imagine the property value has dropped substantially since when it was in operation, and then to use that as the baseline for which to calculate the increment, I think just as a practice, that's very problematic. And now it feels like this whole project has been problematic and kind of one stumble to the next. And I would love to see it get done, but I worry about precedents, and I also worry, I don't know how I feel about, again, I want to see this get done, but I have a lot of heartburn about using, as was stated earlier, kind of in the worst state because it's only half demolished and it's kind of this blight, and so anyway, I just have a lot of heartburn about that.
Is there any further comments or discussion among agency members? If not, I'll call for a vote on the implied motion. All in favor? All those opposed? So that is Councillor Ellsworth, Sewell, Handley, Fillmore, and Hoban in favor, and Councillors Harding and Shipley opposed. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 6. a resolution of the Redevelopment Agency of Provo approving and adopting the Community Reinvestment Project Area budget for the Mixed Community Reinvestment Project Area. Mr. Walter.
Good evening again. So this item is the second half of that. So there is a plan and a budget that are adopted and submitted. This is the budget for that. We were proposing, as I mentioned in the previous presentation, we're proposing to use the tax increment for this to pay for the sewer enhancements that are going to be needed at this location and further downstream. So the budget again references the existing condition of the project, and we estimated the base year to be about 21.3 million, that we took that off the tax roll. And I was trying to see if I could get if there was a significant change in the value between the then and now. So my tablet's not being cooperative, and I apologize for that. It's also, I think, important to point out that all the taxing entities are getting whatever taxes are calculated on that base year valuation, all the taxing entities, including the city, are still getting that level and will continue to get that level throughout the 12-year that we're proposing for the tax increment to be collected. And then we are splitting in the case of the school district, we would keep 70%. In the case of the county, we're proposing 50%. So. Case of the city, we're proposing 75%. Well, still not being cooperative. So.
Any questions for Mr. Walter?
So this hearing is for the budget. The one we just did was for the plan itself. And tonight, later on, the city will be asked to consider an ordinance. Okay.
All right, thank you, Mr. Walter. Are there any members of the public that wish to comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and bring it back to the council for any discussion. Mr. Harding.
I think I got ahead of myself a little bit. I apologize. Based on my concern, I probably should have voted in favor of number 5 and against number 6. I don't think it matters enough to call for, or to request a change. But just to clarify to the rest of the agency, I probably would have, I probably support item 5, but I will be voting against 6, just based on my concerns that I already expressed earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. Are there any other comments or discussion? All right, I'll call for a vote on the implied motion then. All in favor? That would be Councilors Ellsworth, Sewell, Handley, and Fillmore in favor, and Councilors Harding, all those opposed, Councilors Harding, Shipley, and Hoban opposed. Thank you. If there's no objection, then we will adjourn as the Redevelopment Agency of Provo and reconvene as the Municipal Council.
Thank you, Mr. Sewell. Okay, we will begin with item number 7 on our action agenda, which is an implied motion on a resolution appointing individuals to the Metropolitan Water Board of Provo. It appears that I'm presenting this item. I'm happy to do that. The individuals who have been appointed by the Provo City Council are Richard Brimhall, Rachel Whipple, and Jared Oldroyd. The council had a chance to hear from Rachel Whipple and Richard Brimhall earlier this afternoon, but I see Jared in the back. Would you mind coming up and introducing yourself for a moment to the council and
Happy to do so. Thanks for this opportunity. I'm Jared Oldroyd. I've lived in Provo most of my life. I'm a civil engineer with a firm specializing in water resource projects, so I have a background directly related to this, and I see it as a great opportunity to work with the city and help deal with water-related issues and have involvement in that.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Oldroyd. It's a pleasure to have you serving, and along with Richard Brimhall and Rachel Whipple, we think this is a great team to represent the city of Provo. This is an item that's open for public comment, if anyone would like to address the public on this matter. Seeing none, we'll, oh, sorry, yes.
Dennis Weir, Chairman of the Metropolitan Water District of Provo. I just wanted to come, Dan Johnson's unable to be here, our director, and just thank the council for their work. We have an annual meeting down in St. George next week, in fact, 2 meetings. We have a water law and policy seminar, followed by the Water Users Conference, state of Utah. And you worked expeditiously to get these appointments made. That makes it possible for these individuals to join us and to be able to get an annual education that we do down there. So I just express my appreciation to the council.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Sorry, is there any other public comment on this item? All right, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the council. Any discussion on the council? Seeing none, then I will call for a vote on the implied motion. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, that's Councilor Ellsworth opposed, all else in favor. Okay. An implied motion, then we'll move to item number 8, an implied motion on an ordinance approving various amendments to Provo City Code Title 14 for consistency and stylistic purposes. This has citywide application. This will be presented by Aaron Ardmore, Provo City Planner.
Thank you. So these items were actually brought forward or sent to us by request of the council staff. So I'll just run through them real quickly. If you can go to the slides. While he's pulling that up, there was one addition by city staff that we thought was a good opportunity as we're doing some simple fixes to add in, and that will be covered in number 3. So number 1 is just fixing the nomenclature for accessory apartments, now calling them living spaces to comply with Chapter 1430. The next one down is just adding a new land use type designation in regards to bicycle spaces required and reduction of bicycle parking spaces for transit stations. Number 3 is the one that our Provo City staff added. It has to do with design standards. These 2 zones, the MDR and HDR zones, were just referencing the wrong design section. So just a simple fix there. And then number 4 is just a simple date correction, or update, I should say, to reflect the most updated impact fee plan. So if you have any questions, I'm here.
Okay, any questions for Aaron? We'll now open this item up for any public comment. Seeing none, we'll bring it back for council discussion. This item was heard at the Planning Commission meeting on February 26th, and this is the first hearing, so this item meets the following qualifications. That is, should the council members determine this as a routine item and consequently wish to take action tonight, report of action for this item was published last Thursday at 6 p.m. An ordinance draft was reviewed by the council attorney and published by last Thursday at 6 p.m. Any discussion of this item? Seeing none, I will call for a vote on the implied motion. All in favor? Voting is unanimous. We'll have an implied motion now on item number 9, an ordinance amending Provo City Code Section 15.08.060, impact fee calculations that has citywide applications. This will also be presented by Aaron Ardmore, who seems to have slipped out. Is there somebody else who will be presenting, or?
I can take that if you'd like.
Okay.
This was another one that was requested by council staff, and I think the reason probably why Aaron left is it went to the Planning Commission as a consolidated item with the one that you just voted on.
Oh, I see.
When it came back to the council, we decided to split it into 2 different ordinances because the other ones all had to do with land use issues, and this one had to do with an impact fee. The only change, as you can see on the screen at line 33, is we're just, there was a new impact fee analysis and impact fee facilities plan adopted or updated in December of 2019. The code actually refers to that document, and so we're updating the date in the code to refer to the right approval date.
Okay.
That's the only change.
All right, thank you. Any public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to any council discussion. Seeing none, I'll call for a vote on the implied motion. All in favor? Voting is unanimous. We'll now turn to an implied motion on item number 10, a resolution authorizing Provo City to enter into an interlocal agreement with the Redevelopment Agency of Provo City for the Provo Medical School Community Reinvestment Project area. This will be presented by David Walter, who also seems to have...
If I may, it's my understanding that this is the city side of that same project that you adopted by unanimous consent under the RDA.
Yeah, that's right. I'm Adam Long. I'm counsel for the Redevelopment Agency, so I'll pinch hit for Mr. Walter here. But that's exactly right. It's just the other side of that same interlocal agreement.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Walter, is there anything you need to add, or? Sorry.
No, I'm sure he said it better than I could. So.
Okay. All right. This item is open for any public comment. Any comment? All right. We'll bring it back to the council for any council discussion. Seeing none, I will call for a vote on the implied motion. All in favor? The voting is unanimous. Okay. We'll now turn to, man, at this pace, we could do 40 items in a night. This is, something tells me it's not always going to be this easy. An implied motion on item number 11, which is an ordinance amending Provo City Code relating to section 18.03.040 and the drainage manual, citywide application. This will be presented by Rob Hunter, our public works engineer.
So y'all saw me this afternoon in the work session. I don't know if they're going to bring up the slides, but just a shortened version for I guess the public this year. There's a state rule going into effect that new development over an acre needs to retain on-site, not discharge, the first half inch of a storm. It comes through a state permit, and so basically the state says for you to be able to discharge downstream into state waters, you have to implement these rules, and so this is what we're doing. The state rule went into effect on March 1st, so here we are, 9 days later, bringing it into our code. It's to basically for the public, what they would see is a similar development, but instead of the landscaped areas being built up and being kind of the high part of a parking lot. For example, it'll be the low part of the parking lot. Things will be directed to there. It'll be able to infiltrate into the ground, and then overflow will continue into the storm drain system just like it does today. So it's just to clean up the water, keep the volume from the smaller storms from running off downstream and carrying pollutants with it. And once again, this is just to bring us into compliance with state rules, and we're leaving all the options open that we can to development to take care of this in all the typical ways you'd see through rain gardens, vegetated areas, pervious pavement. So we're requesting that the changes to the title and the drainage manual, which is adopted into Title 18 through reference, we are requesting that those be approved by the council.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Hunter?
I do have a question. So I noticed on the map, large sections of the city are blocked out because of well protection zones.
They are.
From past presentations, my understanding is the water that we draw out of our wells in the aquifer are sometimes multiple layers down of shale. Is it shale that prevents, that kind of has these little pockets of water that are almost isolated from above, and that's in part what gives us such high quality water. It infiltrates up in the mountains, and then we can pull it out down here because they're protected by all these layers. If that's the case, then why do we need to protect those wells by not allowing any water to infiltrate in those purple areas? So
some types of infiltration is flat out regulated. You can't do it per EPA standards. They have what they call Class 5 injection wells, and underground infiltration is a type of Class 5 injection well. And so EPA, I mean, that's kind of outside of our control. Some of the other ways of infiltration, we might otherwise, but just because of the well protection zones this is a zone 1 and 2, so these are things that within a 250-day period or less could potentially get down to the well. And so we're taking a look at it and saying that's close enough. I mean, that's fast enough to where we would hate to risk the areas where we're pulling out the culinary water. And so we'd still do treatment. It would basically be the same system. The same rain garden, the same permeable pavement, except you'd have an underdrain system to treat it first and carry it down to the storm drain instead of infiltrating into the soil. It's just to provide protection and make sure that nothing gets into our wells that close to the source. So, you're welcome.
I just want to say thanks for updating this, and this is really exciting. Not too long ago, something like this would be illegal in Provo, so we've made some big strides.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Hunter? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll open this item for public comment.
I'm Sam Ullman, a resident of the great city of Provo. Some of you people remember the old days when we had a big runoff in the spring, and my daughter was canoeing up and down 4th South in Provo, canoeing, and 2nd East, and I have photos of her with her teddy bear. At that point, there was a lot of water going into the ground, and we keep calling it an aquifer, but it's a big layer of gravel, and a couple of houses actually floated from their basements. Provo School, it's Provost anyway, that school over there, had water pouring into their basement through every crack in the wall. And they decided maybe the catch basin up at the mouth of Slate Canyon was a bit of a mistake in some ways, and they're trying to figure out what to do with all that water. What I'm suggesting here is that this program looking for the wells is only part of the issue. My neighbor put in a French drain. I love French. And none of the water on their property goes down the road. It all goes into the ground right next to my basement, and I'm a little bit okay on it because they were careful. But you can't always depend on that, and every single piece of property in Provo is different. There isn't a place 100 feet away that's similar even to where we have layers of clay. Oh, let me think about the Timpview school falling down because the clay layers are moving the water the wrong way. Everywhere you look. Now, I've dug into the ground a little bit. Some of it wasn't too successful. And you hit a layer of calcified clay. We used to call it caliche up in where I was from. No water goes through that unless you punch a hole in it, and then water comes back up. So this needs to be a little bit more judicious in just overall. Putting water into the ground isn't just a casual issue. And that's what, I'm actually here about another issue, parking lot water, that is what we're going to discuss later. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ullman. Any other public comment? Okay, I'll bring it back to the council for any council discussion. Seeing none, I will call, oh, did you want to make a comment?
I was just going to say, I think this is great. If you're familiar with the multi-stake building on 9th East and 3rd North, they've already implemented this, and it's a great way to filter water.
Thank you. All right, I'll call for a vote on the implied motion. All in favor? Voting is unanimous. I have an implied motion now on item number 12, an ordinance of Provo City adopting the Community Reinvestment Project Area Plan for the Mixed Community Reinvestment Project Area. I assume this is also the city side of what we looked at earlier. I don't know, Mr. Walter, if you want to make any additional comments?
Mr. Chair, good evening. So this is the ordinance that the city has to adopt in order to move this forward. I think it's just, it's in kind of, I think it's part of the process. It's a requirement under the law. This will allow us to kind of enter into this public-private partnership with the developer to get the mix going, to get some sewer issues addressed in this community. And it will allow us to enhance that area as well as additional downstream areas that will come online later on as the city continues to grow. It's an opportunity for us to reinvest in our community and make it a better place for all of us. With respect to the issue that Mr. Harding had raised earlier, the difference in that case, by having the lower or the different base year, it just allows us to increase faster and pay it off and reach the cap, the dollar cap, at a much faster rate. So I'm not entirely convinced that it is lower, and I'm still going to be researching that, and I will get back to the council through Mr. Strachan. I'll send him a memo that he can forward on to you with what I find. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walter. Any questions for Mr. Walter? All right, we open this item up for public comment. Any public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the council for discussion. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I will call for a vote on the implied motion. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, so we have Mr. Harding and Mr. Shipley opposed, all other councilors in favor. All right, that brings us to item number 13, an implied motion on an ordinance amending Provo City Code relating to the professional office zone to allow private educational services as a conditional use. This has Citywide Application, and Robert Mills, planner, will present this item.
Good afternoon, evening. Thank you. So this is a staff-initiated ordinance amendment that has, again, citywide application. The proposal is to allow educational services in the PO zone. Currently, any educational service that's affiliated with a state agency or anything like that can go into any zoning district. But those that are private in nature, like a private school, those are actually not allowed in the PO zone, so in an office area. We felt that that would be an appropriate use as a conditional use. So we have suggested that this be added 6800, the SLU code, into Chapter 14, Section 1416.020 of the code. And then we have also created a list of specific conditions that would need to be met for these private educational services to be allowed as a conditional use in those zones. Specifically, those conditions would require these facilities to adhere to the parking requirements in Section 1437.060 relating to schools. The applicant must also submit a detailed parking and circulation plan prepared by an engineer, an architect, planner, or other similar professional. The conditional use may only be approved if the plan empirically concludes to the satisfaction of the Planning Commission or its designee that the existing or proposed facility will not negatively affect area traffic, surrounding land uses, or properties. And then the parking and circulation plan shall include a designated drop-off and pickup zone sufficient for the student population and sufficient queuing space on the property to prevent vehicle backups on the street. And then number 3, such use must conform to all applicable health, safety, and building codes, and then no exterior lighting may shine directly into adjoining properties. So these are the standard conditions that would have to be met in order to allow these types of uses in the PO zone. And we felt that this would be an important thing to apply citywide because other uses that are private educational facilities currently wouldn't be permitted to come into those PO zones, such as like a Stevens Henniger College or a University of Phoenix that customarily are located in office buildings in those office area zones. And so we just wanted to enable this, and I'm available for any questions that you might have.
Any questions for Mr. Mills? Mr. Hoban?
Yeah, well, give me an idea what's the worst case scenario here. Why would we not want to approve this? I've been racking my brain trying to figure out why this could possibly be a bad thing.
Well, I think that's why we wanted to allow it as a conditional use.
Right.
To make sure that as long as a facility was to meet these conditions, we feel like that is an appropriate use for that area. So the worst case scenario is one of these facilities couldn't meet that and then they couldn't be approved.
Yeah, but there's no like school Geddon scenario where we're going to have schools all over in neighborhoods and,
Well, they still have to meet all of the requirements of the underlying zoning district. There are certain, requirements and licensing from the state and things like that. But this just enables a new use that we feel would be appropriate.
If approved, is the assumption then that if they do meet those requirements, we pretty much approve it, or can it be somewhat subjective? Do we have any ability to say, you met all these requirements, you did, we're going to say yes to this one, no to this one?
So as a conditional use is a permitted use in the underlying zone. And the only way that you can disallow something like that is if there is a specific hazard to life and health and safety.
So we approve this, they meet the recommendation, or they meet the requirements, it's pretty much assumptive, okay. All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Actually, another question for you. A school of poker? What qualifies as a school? I should have done this research in advance. Sorry. There's like a million things on the agenda today.
Yes, there are. You guys have had a busy day. So Provo uses what's called the standard land use codes, and those are associated with specific uses. In the 6800 series, anything like a K through 12 would be considered a school, a beauty school, an Arthur Miller dancing school, those types of things. If somebody wants to come and learn how to play Texas Hold'em, I think that would be justified.
School of Rock, because we need one of those.
We do need one of those.
All right, thanks.
But the definition of school is already in our code.
That's correct.
Any other questions for Mr. Mills? Mr. Fillmore?
Just wanted to be clear, if someone applies for conditional use under this ordinance, does that require a final sign-off by the Planning Commission?
So either the Planning Commission or its designee. So if a conditional use comes into the department based on the degree of potential impact, it would either go to the Planning Commission for approval or to an administrative hearing.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Sewell?
I have a question that's more out of curiosity than germane to the decision, but when you mentioned Stevens Henniger, I was just wondering, do we have other PO zones that have private schools in them right now that are non-conforming, other than the one that prompted this?
Not that I know of.
Do you know? Okay, thanks.
All right. We may have more questions later. I don't know, Mr. Mills. Do we have a neighborhood chair who'd like to speak to this item?
Good evening, Marion Monahan, Edgemont Neighborhood Chair. This property happens to lie on the Edgemont neighborhood, but the more affected people are in the North Timpview. The people most affected by this will be Kurt and Susan Bramble. And they cannot be here tonight. Susie's mother was just put on hospice and not expected to live for 1 or 2 days, so they're not here. Now you realize that this change has come about to solve a problem on the building between the seminary, the white, gray, whatever you want to call it, up above the seminary. So it's strictly to make this school that's there already legal. The neighbors have put up with all kinds of problems over the years with this. The school all of a sudden was started, the playground was going in, nobody knew about it. The neighborhood is willing to accept this school. They know the pressures of school and they're willing to do that. But they are very concerned it's not going to solve their problem with the building that's there. They feel that it really should match the zone, which is just down to the west of that, which is PF. And that would solve it. Schools are allowed in PF. So there's no reason why it couldn't be. You don't have to change this whole zone to make it a citywide when you're not sure what unintended consequences could occur. And we've seen that before, that you don't ever think of everything that can come up. So I'm sure that there are neighbors here going to speak to this tonight, but they would be more than willing to live with this if the zone were changed so that the school would be legal, and it's supposed to be there for 10 years. I believe he's got a lease for 10 years. But it's not going to solve their problem with the building, which has given them trouble over the years. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we will open this item. Hold on, Mr. Oman. Sorry.
Wonder if we could ask Robert to respond to that. Why do you prefer this approach as opposed to the PF zone?
Great question. So just for the benefit of everybody here, we're talking about up on Quail Valley Drive, there's a specific office building that currently houses a private school. This could very easily have been drafted in a way that would be absolutely specific to that property. But given the nature of what we're actually asking for, staff felt that private educational facilities would probably be a beneficial thing in the PO zone. And so we elected to proceed that way. The private schools would be allowed in the PF zone, and so that is an option. But the current zoning of the property is professional office.
Mr. Harding.
Who was the applicant on this item?
This was staff initiated.
Staff initiated. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mills. All right, we'll now invite public comment, 2 minutes a person. Thank you, Mr. Oman. Please announce your name and city of residence.
I'm Sam Oman, Provo City Vice Chair of the Mazer neighborhood, and this is a citywide issue. And let's suppose we put this in the across the street in the big apartment house and have 500, how many? I don't know, 50 cars lined up to pick up the children every day and to let them off. There is no way to support that within the most professional office zones. You cannot. And how many parkings are you going to have? One for each student? That's appropriate for Stevens Henniger. Probably not so much for a preschool. And that makes no distinction here. How many parkings? Just one per teacher? One per customer, which is a student? The traffic and parking in this city is already a burden for every citizen that works here and every citizen that lives here. And I'm not sure that this is an appropriate way of looking at it. In Salt Lake, you put a school in a public neighborhood, in a housing neighborhood where it's totally legal, and people can't get out of their house for 30 or 45 minutes waiting for the kids to be picked up and dropped off. That's going to happen. How is Joe Vera going to have a customer? At any rate, those are some real issues that I think are a little short-sighted for just jumping into a one-lot program that has been a sore spot for the neighbors for a long time. And I'm not sure we want that all over the city. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Oman.
Can I ask him a question?
Sure.
Mr. Oman, I just wanted to ask you, you seem to be saying, wouldn't it be problematic if we allowed a school to go into like an apartment building? My understanding is this is proposing it for professional office zoned, so not necessarily apartment buildings.
How many professional office zones do we have in the city? Where are they located? Does that exclude all? Professional office gets kind of fuzzy, because you can put a professional office in a historic home in the middle of any residential.
Okay.
Is that a zone or not? Well, it's a professional office.
Okay, thank you.
So that's a good question.
Thank you. Other public comment?
Becky Bogdan, Provo, Utah. I was here during Planning Commission meeting a couple weeks ago, and the Planning Commissioners had discussed having a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center in this PO zone, and how would that affect some sort of a school. And I got up and I commented on, it doesn't even have to be a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center. In my neighborhood, we had 2 retirement homes, and because of their status for their CUP, they house people with disabilities, and that is the same thing as a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center. And so the 2 on each corners of my neighborhood that were both retirement homes are now drug and alcohol rehabilitation centers. One of those is currently right across the street from the preschool, which they said because this CUP happened before the school came in, it had precedence. And that is the same site, by the way, that the Dixon Middle School, where they wanted to move it at the footprinter site. So if it does go to that area, it will have a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center across the street, just for the fact that it was a retirement home, it had the same conditions with this conditional use permit, and now it's a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center. So I think that's something that we need to consider, especially if this is coming up with Planning Commission, of these things coming through their heads. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sharon Mehmet, I'm also in the Edgemont neighborhood. Part of the neighborhood's concern that I've heard about this rezone is the broad spectrum for the whole city when we're trying to just bring into compliance just one piece of property. We're concerned about unintended consequences. Becky's brought up a good example. You talked about the conditional use permits that essentially have to be given. As I read code, if somebody comes and meets certain criteria, those conditional use permits have to be granted. And I don't think that, I'm sorry, I don't mean to pick on staff, but the very fact that there's a school here is because somebody on staff thought that because the way code is written, they had to say yes. And because it's a private school, they really didn't. And so my concern is making this broad change might open that up even more to places where we don't want it. Concern number two is that in Planning Commission, as they discussed this and talked about meeting some of these criteria, they kind of didn't look at the number of parking stalls is based on not the number of students, but the number of classrooms. And so that would be, I don't think the neighbors would feel like empirically those criteria would have been met under this condition, and yet here we have this school that we're trying to legalize. So that's something else I'm concerned about, the way that part of the code is written that refers to this, in that like I said, the number of parking that's required doesn't have to do with the number of students or how big the school is, it's the number of classrooms. And that I could tell you when I apply is 2, but really it's 10. And I don't know that there's a way in code that clarifies that for us. Thanks.
Thank you.
Becky? Sharon, I'm sorry, Sharon, can I ask you a question? You and Marion have raised the concern about traffic blockage with pickup and delivery, but we have a condition 2B that's intended to address that. Is that inadequate, do you think?
I feel this is inadequate specifically. I know staff has been up there and felt like what's happening now is sufficient. I'm hearing from the neighbors, or have in the past, I should say, that it's not sufficient. And so it sounds to me like it depends on the day. Again, as Marion pointed out, they've gotten used to Timpview and they're dealing with it. And that is also part of this. As you go to buy a home, you see something like Timpview, and if you've got any thought at all, you realize it's a high school, so you're going to be dealing with new drivers and lots of traffic. But there's no way to see that on the surface of a private school unless they've got some really good signage. You're not going to know that you're moving into a traffic situation unless you sit and stalk the house you're considering buying for a couple of days or a week or whatever. Mm-hmm. So maybe, but again, with a conditional use permit, if they've shown staff that they believe it does, it has to be granted.
Let me ask our attorney on that, Brian. If the Planning Commission makes an initial determination that 2B is satisfied, that it won't create blockage on side streets, and I guess they do some empirical measure or assessment there, what happens a year later if that changes? The conditional use permit then subject to being voided if we now have blockage on the streets because there's increased traffic at the school?
John, can you move the timer?
Yeah, I'm actually a little concerned that we're getting into the discussion stage and we're in the middle of public comment, and I'd rather we wait on these questions if that's okay, Mr. Fillmore.
Sure.
To make sure that we get all the, I just want one at a time to let you have a chance to speak. Any other public comment?
Mr. Chair, and Mayor Kafusi and council members. Otto Nuila from Edgemont neighborhood. Even though this is drawn up as a staff-initiated text amendment, it is actually a person who has initiated the staff to do this text amendment due to that property in question adjacent to the seminary at Timpview High School. The property is PO, and the person that initiated the private school, or the lease with the private school, claims that he did not know that it wasn't going to be a private school, that it was going to be a charter school, and hence the movement to have this change. And we have over 100 signatures of neighbors in the area requesting the council to consider that there is a simple solution to this, and we don't need to change all of Provo's zoning, PO zoning, to make his situation comfortable or legal, that we can change this zone back, this property back to what it used to be, which was PF initially back in the 80s. It was changed to PO to allow this building to go in. And now a quick solution would be to just get it back to PF or vote down this amendment and discuss later
as to the best way to do it. But we don't need to change all of Provo's PO zoning when this is the only instance that it's affecting at this time, having a private school. We love the private school. We have over 100 signatures here. We support the school, and we want to help them. We feel it's a great fit. Finally, we have a great fit of what to have in that building and that property. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
I'm Susan Robinson from the Edgemont neighborhood, and I helped Otto Nawila. I'm Susan Robinson. We collected these signatures together, and but I feel very strongly that this was not staff originated, this proposal, and I feel like it is for this one situation. My complaint is we have zoning to keep order in our city. If we just suddenly say we're going to comply to all these amendments and all these things that we have, we're going to make all these people comply to all this. Well, this building across the street from us has had huge amounts of CC&Rs, and none of them have been complied with over the years. We've dealt with this building constantly. We've been fighting it for 30 years, trying to get this building to try to be a place that would fit into our neighborhood. It was great when we had what was the school? It was the Waterford. We had Waterford there, and it was great, and we loved it. But now, ever since then, it's just been one business after another, and they haven't been in compliance. We feel like if they would change it to PF again, it would help our neighborhood, and it would solve this building that should never have been built in the beginning. But I feel like when you do this citywide, I think there's going to be so many people saying, okay, we can put a school in, we'll just put it in, and then we'll get, ask forgiveness, put it in and then ask forgiveness later. I feel like so many people just put things in without being compliant. And I just feel like it will make a lot of chaos and a lot of little things that we really aren't prepared to really deal with. I think it'll make a lot of lack of order in our city. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the council for discussion. I apologize, Mr. Fillmore, if you'd like to continue that discussion with Mr. Jones.
Not a problem. So the question has to do with when compliance with the conditions changes over time, what happens?
Yes, and so in that first sentence, approved only in compliance with section 1402-040, which is the section that governs conditional use permits, which can be revoked when the conditions are not met. And so in 520 subsection 2, that is one of the conditions for issuing the conditional use permit. So and I'd invite Robert to chime in if he disagrees, but my view would be that if that condition is at some point not met, that a revocation hearing could be held and the conditional use permit could be revoked.
What would be the process for that revocation? Would citizens initiate that or the city?
Well, either could, but it basically goes to a code enforcement issue, which normally results from citizen complaints, right? So normally there are citizen complaints to the city that are investigated, and if they're substantiated, then staff takes action to try to enforce the code.
A related question, the public facilities zone, would that accommodate a private school?
I believe so. I asked Robert that question a minute ago. I believe that the public facilities zone includes the entire 6800 series of land use codes, so both private and charter and public schools would all be allowed.
Okay.
Mr. Mills, I have a question for you, if that's okay. Can you...
Just bringing up the code on my phone.
Yeah. If you could just maybe revisit the question that was posed a little bit earlier. Why do you think this is a good solution instead of the PF zone change? And why are you apparently or others not worried about any negative implications citywide?
I do think that this is a substantial and a good amendment, a proposed amendment, because of the fact of it allows a use in the professional office zone that would be consistent with that zoning district, with the activities that go on there. And I think by allowing it as a conditional use that has specific conditions written in code, that allows us a little bit more of the, several neighbors mentioned tonight that there were conditions and CC&Rs that haven't been enforced over the years on a specific building. The city does not enforce a private covenant, but this is not a private covenant. This is actually the law of our city. And so it gives us the ability to make that judgment of whether or not the facility would meet these conditions, and gives us the opportunity, if at some point in the future they're not in compliance, to be able to reconvene that hearing and possibly make adjustments to the conditional use permit or revoke it.
So you see this as actually desirable for other PO zones? I mean, I guess that's obvious in the fact that you're asking for a citywide. It's not there. You don't see any risks associated with that.
Well, I think there are always risks, and that's one reason why we're suggesting it as a conditional use with conditions rather than just an outright permitted use.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Any other discussion or questions for Mr. Mills?
Mrs. Bogdan brought up a great point around what office space can be used for, and some of the various uses. Now, that being said, most private schools, they have to sell themselves to those who pay lots of money to go there. So they're probably not going to open up shop near a drug rehabilitation center. That being said, on the flip side, if one of these schools opened, I know that we have, we have it written in our ordinances and such that schools can't, that drug and rehabilitation centers can't open up near, certain distance to a school and such. Would those things still apply to, say, a private school in a professional office zone?
Yes.
Okay, so we could restrict what could move in next to a school that's already there. We couldn't necessarily restrict a school from moving in next to something shady.
Well, I believe that there are some state licensing requirements that this school would have to go through as well.
I see. Okay.
Speaking of like a K through 12.
Right.
If it was a beauty school, those licensing requirements do not apply.
Okay.
To my knowledge.
Thank you. That clarifies it.
Mr. Harding.
This isn't necessarily for Mr. Mills, just kind of some thoughts based on comments that have already been made. I respect the choice of staff to sponsor this proposal. I don't think it matters where an idea comes from in the community. If someone brings something up to staff and says, hey, I think you should look at this, and staff looks at it and says, we think this is a good thing, we're going to propose it to the council, I fully support that. I think that's fine. I appreciate the comments just a moment ago that at least when I'm looking at this, I see a citywide application, and so I'm trying to weigh it out as on the whole across the city. Does it make sense to have this land use added to the PO zone? And so I'm weighing it from that perspective. I'm not weighing it necessarily from the perspective of just one particular thing. And if I were to vote yes on this, it would have to be because I believe that that's the best decision citywide. I guess the last thing is just we do have in mind a particular property. That particular property does have a current use that is not compliant with the zone that it's currently in. It appears that use is, that no one objects to that particular use. And so there is some effort to see if we can resolve the problem. And we've discussed, at least in principle, a couple of different ways to resolve that noncompliance, which is to change the PO permitted uses, or I guess conditional use in this case, or by rezoning to PF. So I guess that's just kind of the framework by which I'm looking at this.
I'd like to make a comment. Did you want to?
I just want to add one clarification. So in the PF zone, the entire 6800 series is not there, but there's 6810, which is what we would consider a K through 12 plus nursery schools. 6820 is universities, colleges, technical schools, professional school education, and 6830, which is special training and schooling. So it would be permitted in the PF zone.
Actually, I'll wait. Mr. Sewell, yeah, I'll make my comment later.
So I guess first I'll mention what I think my ideal scenario would be, and then I'll talk about what I think my responsibility is to vote under the current situation. I'm not happy that the zoning violation has sort of instigated this. So from that standpoint, I guess I would have preferred that we not act on this and we address the proposal from the neighborhood, which I think is a really good one, is to match the current use with the zone that they're requesting and also match the surrounding uses. However, there's a couple of problems with doing that, one of which is Mr. Jones has counseled us that because of our process where zone changes need to go through the planning commission, that we can't actually address that. Would you like to explain that, Mr. Jones?
Yes, and let me know if I don't address all the points that you had raised earlier, but you had asked a question earlier about whether the council could consider the request for the zone change to public facilities. And obviously there's nothing inappropriate about the council considering or talking about such an idea. There's nothing inappropriate about citizens suggesting that they think that that's the right outcome. But the requirements of both state and local code are that a plan change, zone change must be the municipal council must receive a recommendation from the planning commission on a zone change before approving a zone change. Where that hasn't happened here on this idea of changing it to PF, that would have to happen first. And normally in our code, the standard requirement would be for citizens to submit a petition or application for that zone change to the planning commission, not to the municipal council. Did you want me to talk about the other document as well?
No, I think that's sufficient. Thank you. So given that, we can talk about it, but we can't act tonight on the request to change the zone to PF. So given that, it seems like we just need to address the proposal before us on its merits. I do have concerns about possible unintended consequences, but I also note that by state law, public and charter schools are already permitted in professional office zones. Pardon? Oh, I thought I heard.
Yeah, you heard somebody, but it was
okay.
Not addressing you.
Okay. So from that standpoint, this seems to be pretty compatible with that. I can't really think of why a private school would be.
Excuse me, sir. If you need to be on the phone, could you please go outside, sir? If you need to be on the phone, could you please take it outside? Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So from that standpoint, I'm inclined to support the request to allow the conditional use, but I would encourage the neighbors, if you still would like to proceed with this, to go through the normal process and bring it to the Planning Commission for their recommendation. Then it would eventually come to us so that we could legally consider that request.
Ms. Ellsworth.
Yeah, to Mr. Sewell's point, he said that you don't want to approve something that was kind of initiated by a non-compliant property. The issue of the specific property that we're talking about is that the owner got a I think, and Mr. McGinn or Mr. Mills could speak to this, the owner of that property got a business license, but the city did not make him aware that his business was not compliant in that zone. So that was the city's mistake, and I feel uncomfortable just creating more or drawing out this problem that the owner kind of walked into and that perhaps the city has exacerbated. And I do want to protect their private property rights and find a win-win solution. And I think that this creates that win-win solution. So schools can go anywhere, private schools, public schools, and I think churches can go in any zone. Is that right?
Not private schools.
Private schools cannot go in any zone.
Well, public schools, but not.
Public schools can go in any zone. Churches can go in any zone. Is that right?
Right. And charter schools.
And charter schools, which is different from a private school. Okay. So to me, there's just not too much difference between a public school, a charter school, and a private school. So I'm very comfortable settling this tonight and moving forward.
I think I'd like to add, I think I agree with Ms. Ellsworth on that, and also with Mr. Sewell, with maybe one slight shift in emphasis. I think it's also, I mean, you're not proposing that we make the zone change tonight, as you made clear, but if we were to do that, it would also be in response to an out-of-bounds situation that we were trying to correct. So in some ways, I see the zone change, the desire for the zone change and the desire for the conditional use permit as sort of in the same category as responding to a situation that we discovered was kind of out of sync. But, you know, we exhaustively looked at this issue not too long ago. The neighbors seemed very happy with the school there. I can understand an argument perhaps for a PF zone being the preferred alternative, but I don't want to wait any longer to put this in the right situation and move forward. And if the neighborhood wants to pursue this through the Planning Commission, and there's good reasons for us to consider a PF zone change for this piece of property, we can address that at the time. But I think out of consideration to the owner, I'm a little worried about this also being dragged out to the point of exhaustion. So I think I'm inclined to support it. And then again, if it comes back to us from the Planning Commission, I'll be willing to entertain it at that point. And that is the request for a zone change I would be willing to entertain. Mr. Hoban.
I was just going to say there were some concerns around parking, and you know, I looked it up, and most schools, the research shows most schools have about five parking spaces per classroom, with the average classroom size square footage around 1,000 square feet. Most office complex, and that's high school, by the way, where that would be the worst case scenario. This school being a K through 12, obviously very far fewer parking spots needed. And then on the office space side, it's at least 5 per 1,000, with it going significantly up when it's something like a call center. And I just recall that something the neighbors had really advocated or expressed was that they were super happy that this was now a school and not a call center where they were having hundreds of vehicles, or over 100 vehicles, parking everywhere in neighborhoods and such. And so some of those concerns around parking that were expressed by a couple people, I think a school is in general going to have significantly less of a parking issue than, say, an office complex. Now, school getting in and out can be an issue. I know in this particular school, though, that was monitored by staff. And again, we're talking holistically, but I think in general, this school is a good example, this private school is a good example of what we might see at some of the other schools that might go into these sort of areas.
Any other discussion from the council? Mr. Sewell.
I'd like to make a motion that we correct the spelling on paragraph 2B of queuing from Q-U-I-N-G to, from C-U-E-I-N-G to Q-U-E-U-I-N-G. Couldn't even get that out.
I'm glad you can remember how to spell that.
I had to look it up to make sure.
All right. I would second that motion. Yeah. All right. Seeing no further discussion, this is an implied motion, so I will call for a vote on the implied motion. All in favor? The voting is unanimous. Thank you. And thank you to the public. We'll turn now to our last item on the agenda, on the action agenda. It's an implied motion on an ordinance amending the Provo City General Plan relating to the Transportation Master Plan. This has citywide application. And we'll also have Robert Mills speak to us about this item. I want to just say, by way of the public, we have sort of a general goal to be finished with our meetings as close to 9 p.m. as we can. That doesn't mean that we will rush a vote, so I just wanted to let you know that that is kind of our parameter that we're going to be looking at tonight. So, okay, go ahead, Mr. Mills.
Okay, thank you very much. So, as the council is aware, Public Works, in conjunction with their consultant Parametrics, has been working on an update to the Transportation Master Plan for quite some time. The Transportation Master Plan is an important part of the general plan. It's updated every 5 years and basically sets forth the kind of the goals and policies of those transportation issues for our city and what we want to achieve in the coming years and things to be aware of. So this specific Transportation Master Plan is a complete overhaul of what is existing. I just wanted to note a couple things. The Public Works Department and Parametrics have they've had 3 open houses for the public regarding this plan, have sought input. It has been to the Transportation Mobility Advisory Committee several times to get their input, and also to the Planning Commission for their recommendation. I think that's a great iterative process, and this plan is better because of that. And even today, in work session, there was a bit more of that iterative process. And so after discussing with the council, there are a couple other changes that we're proposing. For project number 2.7, the 820 North from Geneva Road to 500 West. So this is on page 112 of the plan. This is where it lists all of the Capital Facilities Plan Phase 2 projects. These are the projects that are intended from 2025 to 2040. Number 2.7 is 820 North, Geneva Road from 500 West to Geneva Road, excuse me. The existing language said to widen from 2 to 3 lanes to 5-lane arterial. Public Works has suggested that that be changed to similar to what was added for 2200 North, and instead of designating a specific lane count to capacity and safety improvements. So those roadway improvements will be determined by future transportation studies, future transportation master plan. So this particular corridor is very important to our city and has received a great deal of attention. And I think it's important for the council and the public to know that it's going to receive a great deal more attention. And so this particular item, John, if you want to go down just a little bit farther. Keep going, keep going, keep going. There. So this one. So this particular item, there are many things that are going to be continued to study about this corridor area. And right now, this plan is kind of at the 60,000 foot level. of looking at what might be necessary for this corridor. These future studies would come down to maybe the 500-foot level and look at the design, look at the actual capacity, what would make it safer, things like that. So I think that's a very important change to note. They're also suggesting to update the following figures in accordance with that. Figure 2.8, figure 2.9, figure 2.10, 2.11, 2.12. And there's also, they would also like to add an Appendix E, which is an existing Provo 820 North corridor study that gives a little bit more clarification to this corridor and what the intentions for the future are. But that's kind of what I have for you. The recommendation of the Planning Commission was to have the council approve this plan. Staff supports this, especially with these proposed changes and that language. And it gives the important foresight to actually look at it further in the future. So we have Public Works and Parametrics here to answer any further questions for you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mills. Mr. Sewell.
So just a clarification, these proposed wording changes, these were made after the document that we saw earlier today? Is that right? Could we, at some point, could we show those on the screen?
Yeah, so Vern is working on that for you.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I have a
Any
couple
other questions? Yes,
Yeah,
Mr.
I have a
Harding.
question. I think this would be for Mr. Mills as well. So just so I'm clear and everyone's clear, capacity and safety improvements is what is being proposed.
That's correct.
There. Now, that would still encompass, the future, that capacity and safety improvements, if it were determined, so 5 lanes is still kind of falls within that category of capacity and safety improvements.
Correct.
But it doesn't limit it that it should be 5 lanes. It just says it should be something. We don't know exactly what that is, but that could include the 5-lane widening.
So basically, it's just changing it from a specific designation. Because right now, if you look at 2.7, it says that the intention of that corridor is to widen it from a 2 to 3 lane road to a 5-lane arterial. That is, we're going straight for the jugular. And this proposed language allows for that additional study that would be done regardless of whether that language is changed or not. But it just provides that direction rather than we're going to a 5-lane road. We're instead going to actually look at it from a capacity and safety perspective rather than a design that's predetermined.
Is there any scenario under which capacity improvements doesn't mean widening? Isn't that just a euphemism for widening?
Well, I think that there are additional studies that are going to be coming into play that will also have an impact on the regional way that this corridor is handled. There's going to be a study of an interchange for I-15 that may or may not be located at 820 North. If it's not located there, then there could be other implications that would actually reduce the capacity or the necessity of that road. I don't know for certain, but I think it's important to note that this at least acknowledges that the intention is not to go straight to a 5-lane road.
So just to be clear, Robert,
We're treading into engineering territory, and I'm a lowly planner, so.
you're doing fine. My question is, with the change in language, where you're injecting some flexibility into the alternatives down the road, and no pun intended, will it necessarily come back to us for our approval in terms of the final, whatever expansion that might be?
Would they come back? I'll let Shane answer that question.
So we would come back to the council is a funding process, right? There's a funding process that's involved. What we're showing right now, based on what we have, is a $70 million project. With that kind of project, most likely similar to Lakeview Parkway that we have built out on the west side, we may have to look at phasing this in some fashion. That may include what safety improvements or potential capacity improvements do we need that would get us to meet the need of that corridor. It is a significant regional corridor. One of the issues that we have right now is the bridge at 900 West along 820 North. Again, that's what started driving the corridor study, the 820 North corridor study. It is ending or getting near the end of its life. UDOT does every 2 years a bridge sufficiency rating. It is on the low end of that rating. And so at some point when that rating gets below the sufficiency rating for, structurally sound, we are going to need to reconstruct that bridge. And so that bridge also has some safety issues where both vertical, horizontal, roadway, it doesn't work, some sight distance, those kind of things. So there are going to be portions of that corridor that may need to be sooner to be improved, again, from safety standpoint, which would be included in, any capacity improvements. One of the things that you're maybe aware of is, the I-15 corridor or I-15 interchange study that is going to be kicking off here with the state in the next few months. Again, that is a completely independent study from anything that we're doing and I want to make sure that I make that statement. That is completely separate. There is no predetermined location for interchange or interchanges or what type of facility improvements could go through from Center Street up to Parkway. But we understand and recognize what comes from that study may change the aspect of 820 North. And so I think that's where we're saying, okay, we're acceptable to say maybe let's pull back and say instead of this being a 5-lane and it needing to be a 5-lane, depending on other studies or potential other studies that we need to look at here, because we show from a capacity improvement that we're right on that edge, 2040, of needing a 5-lane section. But from a regional perspective and mobility perspective, we felt that was necessary to have improvements there. So we recognize that, and so it's not necessary. Again, it needs to be a 5-lane. We do want, again, back to the bridge, want to make sure that we construct a bridge that allows for future improvements, whatever those are, so that we have that ability to do that. So that's kind of where we said, okay, we recognize the things that are going on. We're willing to look at this in further detail.
Well, I understand, I appreciate that information, and I understand that the bridge is a bit of a linchpin to get things started. But I'm not sure I got an answer to my precise question, which is, whatever the final recommendations or plans are for this road, whatever safety, capacity, widening considerations there are, I want to be sure that comes back to the council to approve, or are we giving some pre-approval to whatever is decided?
No, and absolutely, and I think I would make the statement is, whether that is through another study, independent of the transportation plan, or as it shows right now, the improvements from 5th West to Geneva Road are shown in our phase 2. It is shown out in the future. So we could either do an independent study that we could present to the council, or most likely when we do our next master transportation update in 5 years, as we need to, we will have better understanding of all the environmental documents, all the changes that are happening, that at that time, then we can even define that in a better condition at a future update.
What I'm asking again is, are you required to bring the final decision back to this body?
The final decision.
Mr. Chairman, could I just maybe propose a solution to this problem?
Yes.
So you have on your screen and in front of you, you have some recommended changes to the master plan. Under project 2.7, it says add capacity and safety improvements with an asterisk. which said roadway improvements will be determined by future transportation studies and future master plan updates. You could simply add a little line at the end of that that says, subject to final approval of the municipal council. That would solve your problem.
Thank you, Wayne.
So the answer, yes.
Thank you.
We'll make that easy,
Took us
yes.
a while to
do
get
that.
there.
I think
but
it's good to put it in the document if that's your intent.
Yeah.
Shane's an engineer, you got to cut him a little slack, right?
Any other questions for, yes, Ms. Ellsworth?
Can you describe to us some of the process? There's been some concern over process, and maybe you can just help alleviate some fears. Discuss how there were internal and external planners that worked on this, internal and external engineers that worked on this.
Yes, so I'll go ahead and just refer to Vern Kiesler, who's with Parametrics. I'll let him answer that question.
Thanks.
Good evening, members of the council and Mayor Kavusi. We've been working on this project for 2 years. It is a 153-page document without the 820 North study as Appendix E. We've had 33 modifications to the major local street plan. The council has adopted 6 new roadway cross sections, which I understand the development community and the active transportation community are pretty pleased with. We've had 9 TMAC committee meetings, and they've made this plan a better document. So I just want to tell you that it wasn't in my scope to meet with them 9 times, but it proved to be very beneficial. 3 public open houses. We've had 5 planning commission meetings, including a positive recommendation from both planning commission and TMAC committee. And we developed an active transportation plan that's actually a chapter within this transportation master plan, one of the few cities and first cities that have done that. And this is our 4th time before the city council. Processes, we've identified an impact fee facilities plan, which it shows your impact fee analysis for the next 5, 6 years. And then in 5 more years, the plan will need to be updated. A new impact fee facilities plan will need to be done, and new impact fees are then administered or adopted by the council. I feel really good about the 3 open houses. Each one had a different theme. Our last one was very well attended by a couple of different corridors. 2230 North, I think we've come to what is probably a good understanding of the sensitivity of any roadway improvements to that area. So we have asked and changed the plan to say capacity and safety improvements. 820 North, as Shane stated, UDOT will be doing an environmental impact statement or some type of study like that this year. It will be a 2-year process. And evidently they're looking at some type of interchange access between Center Street in Provo and University Parkway in Orem. We've met with bike committees, neighborhood chairs, taken personal phone calls. We've had lots of conversation, internal and external, with community development or development services, not to mention Public Works and Provo City Engineering. So we feel that over the last 2 years, we've vetted this project pretty well. However, it's not going to please everybody. It is a 30,000-foot look, and sometimes people like the street view better, like Google Maps. So I can answer any questions, or at least attempt to answer any questions you might have.
Go ahead, Ms. Ellsworth.
Yeah, our general plan is pretty outdated. Has it been difficult to make decisions with our outdated general plan?
As you know, land use and transportation are intricately connected, right? I mean, you can't, the impact land use has on transportation and vice versa is important. So I'm not sure when the last general plan was updated, but speaking from a little bit of experience, I think that having worked on a general plan here at the city many, many years ago, it was in need of an update, and usually they're about every 5 years.
Do you have another question?
Yeah, I do have another question.
Go ahead.
You're a planner, not an engineer,
Correct.
and so we have a plan, not an engineering document, right?
It's more planning than engineering, but there is such jargon in there as level of service and capacity and livability standards and all types of the engineering jargon that you would expect. But as my former boss used to say, it's easier to teach planners how to do engineering than it is to get engineers to write where the public can read it and understand it. So I will say that planners wrote this plan.
Thanks.
Mr. Hoban.
Well, first of all, thanks to Robert and Shane and Parametrics just for all the work you've done over the last several years. And Shane was letting me pilfer him with emails over the last couple weeks. Quick question on the changes. I don't want to get too much into the discussion, but I'm encouraged that, maybe there's some recognition that let's take a second look maybe, or third look, or maybe this is the sixth look. So I just appreciate the open-mindedness to that, and especially in my district, it actually impacts, a lot of people on the west side and a lot of people on the east side of my district. But the cost adjustment, will there be a cost adjustment to the 70 million? That was a big concern for me. Was this is the biggest line item in the entire plan, and we kind of aren't sure what we want to do. And it's like you write a goal down, and you're 42% more likely to achieve it. And I don't know if I want to have 70 million written down there and be 42% more likely to spend 70 million, until we have more of a plan, as Mrs. Ellsworth mentioned. A better general plan to guide this. But will that be adjusted?
Not for this particular plan, but I do agree that these are planning level estimates in phase 2. Inflation's going to hit, and we can't determine what that does, right, in the future necessarily. And then in the 5-year update, it will need to be another estimate done for that.
I recognize the estimates are meant to inform us more so than drive, decisions, funding decisions, I guess. So it's, that still makes me a little nervous to have 70 million there, but, okay, thank you. On that, as Shane mentioned to me in an email, we're at least 6 years out from funding anything related to this project. And so knowing that this has to be updated in 5 years gives us an opportunity before any money's spent to revisit this, which makes me more comfortable with that, leaving that in there. But
it's probably even more than the 2026 plan. It's somewhere between 2026 and 2040, and that's the section that we're talking about is between 5th West and Geneva Road.
Right.
The council will see that there is a phase 1 project between University Avenue and 5th West that is needed within the next 5 years.
Right, and I absolutely agree that piece and the bridge are, necessary soon. I drive that bridge every day, so yeah. Okay, thank you.
I had one quick question, and that was, I think earlier this afternoon, I don't know if it was Shane or Robert had mentioned that the complete streets policy was looked at but wasn't formally adopted. Could you explain what the rationale was?
Sure. Rather than having a policy that specifies particular performance measures, what this did is implement an entire bike and pedestrian and transit plan into the active transportation plan. So we included a lot of, there's a cross-section that's been adopted that shows different types of bike and pedestrian treatment that would be flexible enough to apply to various cross-sections within the city. And I think that flexibility is exactly what the city needs as roadway projects. And we divided, by the way, we divided those into the active transportation. We actually did a capital facilities plan for active transportation. And we did a phase 1 and a phase 2. Phase 1A and phase 2A are those projects that coincide with roadway projects and can be done at the same time. And that's all part of complete streets. Phase 2B and Phase 1B stand on their own. So they're not funded, though. That's the challenge. So many principles that you're talking about of a complete streets policy are found in Chapter 7 of the Active or Chapter 5 of the Active Transportation Plan.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harding.
I don't know if you or one of the others are best to answer this, but what happens to the current bicycle master plan that has been adopted? Does that disappear? Do we feel it's been sufficiently rolled into this? Does it still remain an appendice that we can, because there's a lot of tools that are listed out there.
It's an excellent resource, especially dealing with some design issues, but we're seeing things change pretty quickly in regards to active transportation. This actually supersedes that document.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you for your time, and we'll, I guess, now open it up for public comment. Again, I'd request that you state your name and your city of residence, and we'll have a timer to keep you at 2 minutes. If you can't hear the beep, I will let you know that it has beeped, but we would request that you respect those limits. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carrie Ann Parkinson. I live in Provo at 633 North, a block and a half south of 820 North. I really do appreciate all of the thought and effort that has gone into this master plan. I have 3 children. Our oldest is 8, and she's one of the oldest in the neighborhood. And part of the reason for that is that the Dixon neighborhood isn't family friendly. And I really don't think that expanding 820 North to a 5-lane corridor is really going to improve that. I think also you guys have talked about how the master plan is outdated for Provo. And my husband and I, we're from California. We're part of the problem of your transplant people who are increasing the population. And one thing that my family does is we've been married for 10 years and we're a 1-car family that entire time. My husband bikes to work and we spend less than $100 on gas every month. I think that we could take even just a tiny fraction of $70 million and instead incentivize people to bike to work, bike to school, take their kids. I take my kids on the bike everywhere. I have a bike that allows me to carry 3 children. And it's really doable. But I think that if you could work out some plan as part of this master plan to incentivize families to bike, you could really transform Provo and help improve air quality. You could reduce congestion in the city. I think if we just think outside the box, of course these guys are brilliant engineers and what they do is amazing. But we need to think about Provo and think about the way that's going to really be a long-term helpful thing, not just increasing. We don't want to be San Francisco. We don't need a Bay Bridge. That's not why we live here. But we can make this an incredible place for families like it already is and make it that way for 50 years. So thank you so much for everything you're doing.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Spencer McDonald. I live right on 820 North, so ground zero for this. I've lived there for 15 years, and I've been thinking about a couple of experiences I've had. I worked with one neighbor late into the night some years ago because another neighbor had the family had lost the mother and then the father in a matter of weeks, and we put together legal documents for a guardianship because we were neighbors. I was looking at another neighbor who was here tonight, and I thought about how many times I've worked shoulder to shoulder with him, putting in sweat equity into Lions Park, just making improvements, hauling wood out and installing picnic tables and the like. There was another neighbor who was here, worked shoulder to shoulder with him over a couple of weekends to help with another neighbor who has sort of a hoarding mentality. And we helped haul away a bunch of stuff from her yard. And very much to the city's credit, the city provided a dumpster that, which I think had to be emptied 5 times in order to get rid of all this stuff. My point is that that sense of community that lives in that area is real. That sense of community is a key ingredient to that. The 2 ingredients of that community is a sense of cohesion, and I think cohesion requires longevity. I believe that the neighborhood in 820 can and should be preserved by whatever means before the extreme remedy of of exercising the eminent domain power is taken. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Terry McCabe, the Franklin Neighborhood Chair. On pages 60, 111, 114, and the graph on page 112, it shows Draper Lane will be straightened out and extended from 820 North to 600 South beginning by the year 2025. If I would have known that this was on the master plan, I would have never spoken at Planning Commission meetings in favor of businesses expanding on Draper Lane. I went to the most recent transportation open house and I was blindsided by this new information about Draper Lane. Also on the maps of pages 60, 111, and 114, it conflicts with a map I received by Robert yesterday about 111 West. The way the south end of Draper Lane is supposed to be is conflicting in these two maps. I did speak to home and business owners on Draper Lane, and they were all surprised that this was in the plan without notifying them. I assume there has not been a study about how Draper Lane will be straightened out, but I request it be removed from the master plan until details have been finalized, because this will affect so many affordable homeowners that just were recently built and business owners. Next, on page 58, it says crosswalk standards need to be improved. And on page 132, it says access near the Provo Central Station needs to be improved. We need a crosswalk or whatever improved standard at the intersection of 200 West, Freedom Boulevard, and 500 South, which is the block just north of the Front Runner Station. And don't forget, we need the pedestrian bridge to the Front Runner Station. I believe the engineering department needs more communication and input by the neighborhoods before this plan is approved by the council.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Eric Chase. I'm the neighborhood chair in the North Park neighborhood, and I sent you guys all emails, so I want to be brief. I know nobody likes being stuck in traffic, and I know it's especially bad on 800 North right now because several of the other cross streets are closed due to construction on 500 West. So you can't go across on 500 North or 100 North, which are designed to be major throughways through the city. So people look at the traffic that sometimes backs up during the busy times on 800 North now. And I know it's tempting to say, well, we'll just widen all the roads in Provo, but I want to just speak out against that kind of attitude. We're never going to be able to get rid of traffic in central Provo. Widening the roads, especially along 800, is going to have a huge negative impact on the neighborhoods there, on the community. And I just want to say, I think we can find better solutions to that than just having our default be widen the roads. And I'm a little concerned how interchangeably some of the documents have improving and widening roads. And I don't think that's the right attitude to take when we're trying to improve access to our city. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sam Ullman, Provo. Thanks for this study. I've appreciated the effort that goes into it. I also recognize it's not a legal document, it's a reference and a support of information for us to make decisions. And I asked Commissioner Ellsworth last night on an email or night before where I could find a copy of the master plan. Whoa, you look back at that, way before George Bush. And that's a long, and it's been updated in 2007. I read the whole thing and got a lot of information about geography, not so much about the plan. No, and I have to disagree that engineers are totally open from planners. I've been an engineer, planner, and a designer all my life, and if somebody suggests something engineering-wise, I'll buy it right away. But at any rate, I appreciate the effort that goes in here, and I would like to see something on the city's website where I could find these documents. The neighborhood plans, I guess they're there, but I can't find them. And taken in totality, they present a pretty good master plan. This transportation plan only has 200,000 pages, but it could be on a website somewhere. The energy plan, there ought to be a place where we can look that up as citizens and find this information easily and have it in English. That's my language mostly. And I appreciate that effort. And I'm sure that that suggestion will ring a bell over here to the, and I don't know whose responsibility, but I suspect it's the mayor's to figure that one out. Appreciate your help and all your work on this.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. My name is Glenn Jaspering, and I live in Provo in the northeast part, and I own some rental buildings in the area that has been set aside up here. And I am not necessarily for or against it. I would not have a problem with it if we were all compensated properly for 1031s, the price of the building at the time, things of that nature. So that's not a problem. But what I'm having a problem with right now is, and this is not a problem of yours, but I thought maybe you could address it. Some people have come to our rentals and telling us they're going to be torn down. And I've already had one tenant call me and say, when are we going to have to move? And I don't think they were given all the specifics. And so what I'm hoping is that in the future, we're talking 5-6 years away, I'm assuming, but I'm hoping that we can not get everybody excited in the area, because that might make it difficult to rent in the future. And I don't want to scare the tenants I have. And I know other properties in the area, we've had the same issue. I have another owner with me here. He was just too chicken to get up here and speak, I think, but he's got the same problem. So we would hope that you could maybe address that in some way, like if they come out to do surveys in the next year or 2 or 3, if people ask them, well, I just don't want surveyors saying, oh, we're going to tear the places down, things like that is what I'm concerned about in the future. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Good luck with that 70 million in 6 years.
Hello, my name is Christy Jensen. I'm in the River Grove neighborhood, and I would like to agree with this gentleman back here. Our neighborhood has a very clear sense of community, and we have put a lot of sweat equity into our neighborhood, especially in Lions Park, but many other projects throughout our little neighborhood. And 820 North concerns me because it would be have a negative impact on our neighborhood. And I've been blindsided tonight by this document that says Columbia Lane is scheduled to be widened to 5 lanes. So that puts 2 5-lane roads on each end of our neighborhood, and that certainly is not a basis for a healthy neighborhood at all. It's not going to be safe. I walk a lot, I bike a lot, I ride scooters. I've been almost hit a number of times. I have been hit one time, and I just feel like that we need to be more pro-neighborhood. And I also feel like the wording change tonight is just trying to appease the neighborhood, but it's not really going to change anything in the document that's already been set forth at all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
My name's Hannah Levitt Howell. I'm a Provo resident in the River Grove neighborhood. Widening 820, as other people have said, would certainly impact our neighborhood. And I understand that changes need to be made, right? Provo's growing. But this would be an irrevocable change, and it would permanently change not just the River Grove neighborhood, which has a great sense of community and truthfully is a wonderful place to live, but it would irrevocably change Provo as well. And I think this $70 million price tag should alarm us when other options haven't really been tried. On-street parking could be eliminated, and it could be made into a three-lane road. The turn lane could really help. I run and bike on 820 almost every day, and except for the 2 locations by the schools, it really isn't terrible at most times of the day. And so I think that the council really should look into other options before spending this $70 million, and also with Columbia, like Christy said, it would just decimate the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you.
I am Kathy Heinmarsh, and I have lived in my house for 40 years, and I live by the river bridge, and I live on 800 West. And I am very concerned about widening the road because you have 5 schools right in the vicinity of this 800 and 820 North. I am very concerned about children crossing 5 lanes. I am concerned about, and somebody said that they wanted the freeway exit for the hospital so that they can get patients to the hospital quicker. But if you come from Geneva Road and go up the hill on 820, you have 2 trains you have to stop for. You have to all these schools that will have crossing guards out there, you know, and to me, that is my very biggest concern. And the price tag of this monster is very large. And do the Provo residents have enough money to pay for this? Because you have mostly students in this valley, and you have a lot of, and then there's, 2 universities, and you also have the Provo College. So you're going to tear down the Provo College, you're going to tear down the new Freedom Academy, you're going to tear down all of these buildings that are along that road. I don't know if that's all of, I haven't really known what you're going to do with it.
Thank you. That was the bell. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. All right, that was one.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'd like to request as the neighborhood chair of the River Grove neighborhood that I receive 5 minutes to speak rather than 2 minutes.
I didn't allow any other neighborhood chairs anymore, so I'm sorry. I'm going to have to be fair to everybody.
This is the neighborhood that will be most directly affected by what is being discussed.
I understand that, but there's actually a lot of things in the master plan that affect every neighborhood, and we didn't make that rule for everybody, so.
All right.
Appreciate your cooperation.
For our neighborhood, this issue is existential. Widening 820 would mean the destructions of dozens of homes. Also, widening Columbia Lane, the other main road through our neighborhood from the 2 to 3 lanes that is now to a 5-lane arterial, will foreclose any commercial redevelopment on that stretch of road. So our fate lies in your hands as our elected leaders. As you've heard, UDOT will begin a study of where to put an interchange in the next 6 months. If you as the City Council approve the widening of 820, the widening of Columbia Lane, even with this new language, which Public Works has said, you know, if we can, this doesn't prevent us from doing what we want to do in the future. If, for example, with 820, if this, even with this language in the Mass Transportation Master Plan, UDOT will likely see this as a signal that Provo wants an interchange at 820. You and I know that regional and state plans reference local plans. So
I can give you 30 more seconds because I took 30 of it to explain myself. Thanks, Aaron.
we need to create a plan based on a vision of what we want to become, an even better place to live, work, and move around and beyond. You've heard that the intent to widen these roads has been in the public works planning documents since the last century. You heard that at work session today. That intent was the product of that century, the 20th century. Should we base our future on the failing paradigms of the last century? Our goals for our future should be developed through a truly collaborative, interdepartmental planning process that welcomes community input in a truly democratic and inclusive way. This document was written by planners, but it was written by planners working for engineers for the Public Works Department. Finally, our plan should be thoroughly and carefully evaluated, reshaped, and ultimately approved by you, our local elected leaders, who have a vision based on the future rather than on the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
I'm Brent Hall, River Grove neighborhood. My wife and I built a home there almost 50 years ago. And through the years, we have met with the various people who hold your chairs. And each time we said, please don't widen that road. And it continues to stay on that same thing through all these years. I had an opportunity to read a newspaper article from 1905, some time ago. I think I shared this with you once. They talked about there being a livery stable in New York, in Manhattan, on every corner. And their biggest concern was how to get rid of the manure. 10 years from then, they didn't have any problem because there were no livery stables. I think we're in a position where we're also in a transitory state where things will change. And I think putting this road in will destroy our neighborhood, and it will put us in a position when methods of moving are different, that we won't be able to take advantage of them, and the neighborhood will be gone. Right now, we've got so many people buying homes and renting them, not taking care of them. We're fighting for it. The zoning people are down, what, four zoning officers now? They can't take care of the problems that we've got. Add 5 lanes on there, and it's just going to drive a nail right through our hearts. Thanks.
Thank you.
Parker Howell, River Grove neighborhood. As a lot of my neighbors and fellow Provo residents who will be affected by this have said, I'm obviously concerned with the impact it'll have on the River Grove neighborhood and the other neighborhoods nearby, but I also just think it's a costly mistake that is unjustified with the current data. From what I've been able to see, there's average annual daily traffic is around 9,200 and 11,000 on 800 and 820 North respectively. And the stretch from Geneva to 500 has actually decreased from a peak of 9,300 in 2003. The Transportation Master Plan says a 3-lane road, which we have now, can support 16,000 average annual daily traffic on a road with moderate conflicts. Like you, I believe it's important. It's an important duty of the City Council to plan for the future and to think about, right, all the way out into 2040, as this plan does, how our roads are going to look, especially how we're going to have east-west access. But I think that using the current estimates to justify a 5-lane road is unwarranted, especially where there are 3 schools on this. I'm not directly impacted by these schools. I don't have family who will attend there, but I think 3 schools, that accounts for a good portion of this 9,000 to 11,000 average annual daily traffic. Doing kind of back of the napkin math, it's anywhere between 15 to 30% of that annual adjusted or annual daily traffic is going to and from these schools. And that's a figure that's never going to increase in 20 years, 40 years, where we have a cost-effective solution to restripe, remove on-street parking. I think it's unjustified to spend $70+ million destroying homes and weakening neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you.
Becky Bogdan, Provo, Utah. First of all, I have to thank these guys. They worked with me very well. I explained all the concerns of the neighborhood, and they did what they had to do to help resolve those. And then when the active transportation portion came through, they were very good to add that for the west side so that we could go ahead and have that in place as development goes. However, talking with Brian Taylor, our Sunset Neighborhood Chair, he did have some concerns about an east-west corridor. And I appreciate Dave for bringing that up today in work meeting. And whatever I can do to bribe these guys for the next master plan, bring in cookies or donuts, we would really like that studied and looked at so that we have better mobility throughout the city, especially right there in the center where Center Street is really kind of screwed up. Brian was also really concerned about the Draper Lane connection, because right now, the way they have it scheduled, they have like 6 fourplexes that have driveway access on both 5th South and 6th South. And so because of their forethought, the city now wants to put a road right through there. And that would take away some of that affordable housing. He thinks that maybe an impregnated roundabout at the railroad would probably solve that problem without taking out that housing. And also, his other big concern was 1600 West. 1600 West is an alleyway between 6th South and 1150 South. And with the development coming in from the south, with it not connecting clear to the parkway, that needs to be addressed. Because even when the ballpark is full, there's a lot of traffic, especially with Sunset Elementary on 6th and footprinters over there, that the residents are saying that the police are coming and saying you cannot park on that street because it makes it a 1-lane highway. And there is no sidewalks or anything for safety for the children. So that is something that we really like to see addressed in the capital improvements plan or something. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Daniel Burt. I live in the Carterville neighborhood here in Provo, and I appreciate your time. I sent you an email, and I've gotten several responses, which I very much appreciate. Just responses noting that you've had my email. Most of what I was going to say has been said better, so I will just say that I also believe that as the elected council, I would ask that you lead towards a future that is not so dependent on the automobile. One of my favorite things about living in Provo versus Lehigh, where my brother just moved out west of the freeway, is that there are older, cohesive neighborhoods. This is one that is mainly being talked about, where you can walk and bike to things. I'm hoping to stay within Provo and live here for a long time, and as I plan where to live, I will be moving soon, within the city. I'm looking for a place that is walkable and bikeable, and I can access transit. And I think that I represent a significant part of my generation in that respect. Thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate the listening ear that I have felt from you, and I also appreciate the work, really, of everyone that has been working on this plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sharon Memmott, good luck with that as you look for a place to live near transit, because the Transportation Master Plan doesn't have anywhere that has any park and ride lots in it. So those of us in the Northeast, if we want to access the UVEX to get down here, might as well just keep driving because there's just nowhere to park first. So that's one comment on the Transportation Master Plan. Two is, Mr. Handley, I appreciate you pointing out the change on 820 of the capacity and safety improvements, because when that change was made to 2230, that's exactly how I read it, was that, well, this could still become a 5-lane road, but this is the way we're going to write it for now. And I appreciate that this is a 30,000-foot plan, and we have put into the plan to do an on-site plan, but as Mr. Fillmore said, and I appreciate Mr. Parker interjecting that you could bring that back to the council for final approval. That being said, what I heard at the open house was neighbors concerned that we're being told now is not the time for input on specifics of this plan. But as we get closer to the time when it's time for specifics, we get lost. And we don't know when exactly it's time for us to give that input before they're digging with those shovels, and it's too late. So I would hope that you would help us understand that as neighbors, where we fit in this process, that we can make those comments as actual projects are coming up, and help us understand how this budget is done. As it says different numbers on different projects, are those put into the annual budget, or are we getting funds from the state and the county on those things? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Aaron Bartholomew. I live in Provo, in the Riverside neighborhood. Two comments, and I think while those of us in the River Grove neighborhood really appreciate the gesture of modifying it from a 5-lane arterial on 820 North to simply look at capacity, I don't know that it really changes anything, especially with continuing with the $70 million number right near it. It seems disingenuous to us that live in that area of the city. It seems like that's a plan of placation. And in the intervening 5 years before this is updated again, it's a blight on the neighborhood. People who, I have neighbors who are in their 70s and 80s worrying about downsizing and saying that they're worried about being able to even sell their homes in the next couple of years because the transportation plan says that their houses are going to be demolished and people don't want to buy them. There's no reason why those studies that Public Works wants to complete can't be completed with that language of capacity removed from 820 North. The studies can happen anyway and then have it revisited in 5 years. It seems like it's still a placeholder for the plan to happen. The last thing I want to mention is why are we not looking at, and the Transportation Master Plan doesn't even seem to address any additional possible corridors east-west in the city. It's completely omitted. It looks like there's only two options, and that's build on existing roads and Center Street, and we all know how much we all love that, and then 820 North. Are there no other ways to extend 500 North through to Geneva Road or do something similar like that? I think we need to study that out more and see if there's a greater possibility of spreading that traffic, because we do need better east-west access. There's no denying that. But can we not spread the traffic throughout the city in a common sense way? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Wayne Levitt of the Joaquin neighborhood. I'm also vice chair of the Joaquin neighborhood. And I'd just like to take a minute to express my solidarity with the River Road neighborhood. When I moved to Provo a number of years ago, 5 years ago, one of the first issues that came up was what to do with 800 North. There was some kind of study about how it could be widened, what it could look like. And it was a horrifying, that the options were horrifying, considering what 800 North is to the walking neighborhood. And so while tonight we haven't talked about 800 North that far east, I feel what my friends and neighbors in River Grove are feeling when they see something so important to their lives and to the way they live their lifestyles being threatened. I don't think you can find anyone that is excited to have a road widened in front of their house. You're going to be hard up finding someone like that. But I do want you to reflect maybe on going somewhere else, another city, another country, wherever, where people have been excited about a road, excited to take you to see a road. It's an incredible thing when you go to a place and the person who's hosting you says, oh, we got to go over here and you have to see this road. We don't have roads like that in Utah. We don't. I mean, even tonight there were people who were kind of making little jabs at Center Street, for example, and for various reasons. You know, driving a car down Center Street can be a little bit of a hassle. 15 miles an hour, that's too slow, whatever. It has this weird bend in it. But what would happen if we actually planned a city where people were excited where you were excited to show visitors your road, where you were excited to take someone and say, look at what we've done, and isn't this great? So please consider that as well with the master plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Christina Bartholomew in the River Grove neighborhood in Provo, and I've sent you an email that outlines my main concerns about this. I do want to just emphasize that the River Grove neighborhood is a treasure in the city. We have dozens and dozens of riverfront homes, and I've lived in 2 of them, and it's amazing to live on this river and to have access. We walk to the grocery store, we walk to school, my kids can bike to school. My kids are crossing 800 North every single day, and I have 11 of them. And, you know, I think once you take out the road, it's gone. And right now, the main reasons traffic's not flowing is, number one, all the construction in the city is funneling people onto 1800 North. And then we've got the trains stopping traffic completely, and the 2 schools. And I think we've got to work on fixing those specific issues that are not even connected to the widening before we look at widening. I think there's a lot that we can do to strengthen east-west access that doesn't have to funnel everything onto this road where the railroad has the right-of-way and they can stop anytime they want and just stop impeding traffic. This is just a poor planning ideas to send everyone down just one road and to widen it and then make islands out of these little areas in our city. And I don't think that's what the character of Provo we want in the future. Our families should be emphasized, and we should put that on there. My other concern with the language change is that it does feel like you're just kind of mollifying it to the neighborhood to get them to shut up for the next 5 years, and then we're going to be back here again in 5 years saying, don't shut it down, and you're going to say, well, it's been on the master plan for so many years. Please, get some new ideas. Let's get into this century, and let's realize that transit's coming. Driverless cars are coming. Things are changing. People want to be able to bike and ride and walk, and that's what we need to emphasize. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Doug Oldham. I live in the Pleasant View neighborhood. I also sent you guys an email today, and thank you for your kind responses. I just wanted to stand up here and represent the Pleasant View neighborhood because everything that's been said for 820 applies to 2200, but not in 5 years, in now. Our project, 2200 to be widened, is in phase 1. We have the exact same issues everyone at 820 has. We've done a good job as a neighborhood about attending TMAC meetings and attending the Transportation Master Plan open houses. I would say that I appreciate the process. I appreciate the opportunity to give feedback. I feel like those were opportunities more for the engineering department to explain to us, to persuade us why what they needed was right, as opposed to listening to what we had to say. And I think that this illustrates a problem if several neighborhoods have this concern that we're allowing priorities that are dictated through engineering to determine what the character of our city is going to be. And I think we ought to do it, I think there's a better way. I think we ought to determine what we want and then design the streets and the cities using proper engineering to make those places work the way we want them to work, as opposed to allowing traffic counts to determine what's going to happen in our city. So that's really all I had to say. I think I really appreciate Aaron's comments. He pretty much hit nail on the head what I wanted to say. So thanks for listening, and good luck.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mary Wade. I'm from the Dixon neighborhood. I just wanted to say that I feel like there may be a lot of temptations here to just move forward for a few reasons. One being maybe, planning for increased capacity. We keep hearing about this growth, but we do also know that Provo isn't projected to experience the same level of growth as the rest of Utah County. So it's hard to imagine these numbers getting there, right, of 11,000 at the peak being used on 800 North right now, as opposed to the standard listed in the Transportation Master Plan of 36,000. And, well, besides the phenomenon of induced demand, maybe. And then the fact that this $70 million price tag might not all come from Provo, of course, there's state, MAG, all sorts of different sources, so maybe that can be a temptation to justify this $38 million per mile cost. But it's still a tremendous cost, especially when we take into account the eternal maintenance of this widened road that our children and their children will forever be bearing. Then there's also the conversation of the east-west mobility. That's valid, that's important. But again, I'd just like to see us exhausting other solutions before making this kind of, as it was stated, irrevocable change to these neighborhoods, to this road, to children's access to Exchange Park, back down to Timpanogos, over to the River Trail, and of course this community being severed, as I said in my email early, the way that you picture 900 East being severed in those neighborhoods as a 5-lane road. I used to deliver Meals on Wheels by bike across into those neighborhoods, and seeing the way, especially homes that were right up against that 5-lane road, people really were very much trapped by the design of that wide road. It did make that a divide. I just wanted to propose removing the 800 North, 820 North widening proposal altogether from the master plan. Thank you so much for everyone's time.
Thank you.
Hi, Tim Rich. I'll smile for the camera. I'm from the Dixon neighborhood. I just wanted to also reflect a lot of those thoughts on the 820 North item, and considering the cost of this and exhausting our other options that would come at a much lower price tag, because we do have to pay for that. And to reflect the sentiment of considering the culture of what we want Provo to be, I agree that we don't want east and west of the freeway to be two different places, but I think there are a lot of other creative options that come at a much smaller price tag for us to be able to maintain that type of east-west connectivity. I live just right off of 500 North, and I am not opposed to us looking at some sort of connectivity there from 500 North to help spread that load out, as opposed to turning 820 North into a 5-lane space. Because I do think it changes the culture, and it comes at a very hefty price tag at $38 million per mile. I think there's a lot of other options, and I sent an email on yesterday considering how we can use restriping to help balance some of the load that we're experiencing there, which is a good amount coming from the construction and a lot of funneling that's happening on 800 North because other roads aren't turnable currently. So please consider removing this item from the Transportation Master Plan. It's an irresponsible use of money, and we need to look at our other options that are more frugal and more responsible and maintain the culture of our city. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ryan Franson. I'm from Provo. I think I have a unique perspective. I used to live on 820 North, and we recently sold our home through MAG as part of the corridor preservation process. And one of the reasons we did that is if you look at our house on 820, there's a nice wooden fence. And that was paid for by insurance money because a car ran through that fence and landed in our backyard. There's another fence that runs north and south that was paid from another insurance claim when another car ran into my kid's tree house. So 820 as it isn't safe. And so I think it needs to be improved. And so when we talk about maybe taking on-street parking, to me, that doesn't seem like a solution just from my own experience. I don't think that's worked. I echo the sentiments of adding additional corridors, the 500 North corridor. I think even maybe Sand Hill on the north side, looking for some east-west accesses to take off pressure from 820. To those of the neighbors who are concerned about, selling their house, I would say my experience with the city was fantastic. They were very transparent. Process was clear. We got a fair price. And so if it comes to that, if there's situations where there does need to be improvements to make the street safer, I think, and while the neighborhood's up here talking about certain things, I can also say there's probably been a half dozen different neighbors who have approached me about that process. So I think there is some willingness. This whole conversation doesn't come as a surprise. I've been to the public meetings before. We've known this is coming. Something's going to happen. But I think it really comes back to the council to say, what vision of Provo do you want it to be? I think there's a way to improve the corridor, to preserve the neighborhood, and to not make it this commercial corridor, which I think would ruin the neighborhood. So anyhow, a lot of thoughts there. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Kat Linford. I live on 820. Know all of you. I have a lot of friends and colleagues here, so I'll be very careful. To the point of the public meetings, the open houses that were held, that have been bragged about all day long during the study session and tonight, the 3 open houses, I attended them. And this is in the plan as it states. The comments that were given, and it says 2 comments were generally negative about the plan, open house, citing insufficient consideration of future growth, boards insufficiently explained. I echo that sentiment very much. When we went to the open houses, we walked away more confused than anything. There was no plan. It was, this is what we want to do. It wasn't an option. Some of the other comments were 5 comments mentioned 820 North, 4 negative. Opposition to the proposed I-15 interchange was the most pronounced, as well as concerns related to driveway access, cut-through traffic, student safety, and adequate compensation for eminent domain actions. Even though there were negative comments, and I'm sure there were more, but these were just the long written comments, 4 out of 5 were negative towards this. This was during an open house. This was during public comment. And yet still, in the plan, they still propose to push this forward. My proposal is to you as the council is to hold this. Nothing has to be decided. And let's study it. I'm not opposed to study. I'm not opposed to change. And I know progress has to happen. But I think to make a decision to make the general plan and the transportation plan approved as it is, I'm opposed to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Try to make it interesting. I know it's a long night. So my name's Jay Lichty. I live in South Orem, over by the old R.C. Willey, but I grew up in Grandview Hill. And I just want to talk about 2 areas. Real briefly, first the 820 North. And then the second one is Draper Lane, which if you scroll to 2.14, I drive every day to Draper Lane. And Grandview Hill, the 820 North, I did my Eagle Scout project years ago and presented a traffic survey from residents to this very city council, so I understand safety and the importance of the community, but I wasn't going to talk about 820 North, but my family just spent a vacation in Europe, and if those Germans can make it work on those little roads and everything that happens, maybe we need to have a little more patience. But it seems to me because I drive that road almost every day all year, and the only time it's really busy is like on the 4th of July football games or when the train's backing people up. But, and I'm all for saving, historical things as much as possible. And there's, what's going to grow downtown? More skyscrapers? Or, is there really that many more people that need to move back and forth through there? Okay. Anyway, getting to the Draper Lane, 21 years ago, I started a business on my mom's kitchen table in Grandview, and now it's a multi-million-dollar business every year. And we are on Draper Lane, about 100 feet off the interstate, and we're in the process of purchasing the building, hopefully soon from our landlord who's here. And that area does need a facelift, but we built a new office building. It's really nice. We're putting up $20,000 signs. We have an archery product business. We're kind of an icon to Provo. And eventually we'll do like a little retail area in there and kind of be like a Ben & Jerry's. We do light manufacturing. But 2.14 has proposed of running the road right through there. And, we have no clue about what's going on. We have no idea. And we kind of blindsided by that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
My name is Stuart Withers. I live in the Fort Utah neighborhood. I take 820 North to work daily, either by bike or by car. By bike, I'm not a fan of it being widened. As a car, it's not the end of the world if it gets a little slow during peak time. I can plan my life to accommodate an extra 5 minutes for traffic. But seeing all the different projects on the capital facilities plan, both phase 1 and phase 2, especially all of the lane widenings from 3 lanes to 5 lanes in phase 2, got me thinking a lot about, and all the remarks about engineering, I work in engineering, made me think about what's the city's goal. If the city's goal is just for its transportation master plan, to accommodate moving as many cars as possible, to increase the vehicle miles traveled, then yes, these traffic models, they show a lot of cars. Over the years though, we've also seen that Provo City has done projects to increase bicycle lanes, to increase access to transit, to better improve pedestrian access and crossroads. Is all of that because we want that for city marketing to show, look, we're a safe city, or is that because we actually want those to be viable alternatives to driving? If the goal of the city is to reduce the vehicle miles traveled, then our engineering approaches and our planning approaches need to reflect that. One thing that I've seen quite a bit of is just that we have all these projects are based upon more vehicle miles traveled, higher traffic counts. But if the goal is to reduce that, because we are constrained by geography, we have more people and we have the same amount of space. And 170-pound me is a lot easier to plan to move a lot of me than me as a 2-ton car. And if our goal is to improve mobility and to improve people's access, but we're doing all of our projects based on car traffic counts, then that's not really helping our end goal.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Allison Bartholomew. I've lived on right by 820 North in a cul-de-sac. I cross 820 North almost every day, and I can just say that there aren't that many cars that travel through there. Really, the only congestion is like with the schools and with the railroad tracks, and that's not really going to be fixed with widening the road. The trains are still going to be there, and they're still going to stop traffic. And I really love our community. It's a great home. I'm not going to feel safe trying to cross a 5-lane road, and I've got 10 siblings, and 7 of them are younger, and I don't feel comfortable with them crossing that road. And you can't really replace homes that people have lived in for such a long time. We have a lot of old couples there. You can't just give them money and say that, okay, that's all better. And I just think that people are more important than efficiency. I think people can spend a little bit more time traveling somewhere, and that's not as important as all these people who've lived in their homes for so long. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
My name is Michael Bartholomew. I have lived in the River Grove neighborhood all my life. I take 820 North to and from school every day and drive on that road every day. The only problems I've ever experienced have been from the trains and when the schools get out. And it seems to me that if that's really the only problem, I look up there at the price tags of each of these changes. It's $70 million, which is a lot of money. I think we can all agree about that. And even with the congestion, it's not very bad. I actually just drove through 820 to get here. It was the easiest road to drive through to get to this place. So yeah, that's my part. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Amy Clyde, and I live on the boundary of the Dixon neighborhood and the River Grove neighborhood, and our family has lived in that neighborhood for over 10 years now. I frequent 820 pretty regularly. We like to go on the trail a lot, and we do a lot of walking. And the only times where I feel like it's really a problem is when there's big events kind of over towards BYU, or during rush hour. Honestly, I feel like if this is a decision that the council wants to make, then it's one that they need to make at a time where there isn't major constructions on 2 of the busiest roads that we have here in Provo. We've had construction on 500 North for approaching a year now, and also on Cougar Boulevard, which I believe that one's almost at an end or has already ended. The car counts, I can tell you, most of the car counts have come from people trying to avoid all of the construction that that have been on those roads. So my feelings are that the council should wait until the construction has been completed and then take a survey again of the cars that are actually using that road regularly instead of using it just try to get around the traffic that's in the area. Thank you.
Thank you.
I am Dennis Russo. I live at Castlebrook. I think you responded to my email. Thank you. I just want to say something. Who knows better what's best for us as the citizens of Provo? The politicians that are making decisions or the people that live in the neighborhoods? I see a bunch of people here not wanting this to pass, and the only people that are in favor are the planners. So I think, I'm just here to watch how you vote, because I like to vote as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, no applause. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Is there any other public comment? It's probably an opportune time to bring it back to the council in any case, but Chris, okay, one last one, and then we're going to need some time as a council to discuss, if that's okay.
It's a good one, I promise. I work in active transportation and finding funds for active transportation facilities. And the number we kind of use as like a rough estimate is $1 million per mile of multi-use trail. And that's like the very best you could do. We could do 70 miles of that in Provo for this one project, which is just like a little context, which would make us like the premier, probably in the country, city for active transportation. Just for this one project, we could do something like that. But I think also just also respecting the work that has gone into this plan, because it's obviously a lot of work, and I think the consultants have done a great job within the parameters that have been set for them. But I think a lot of attention has been on 820 North and places where people are living, but I think we need to generalize those feelings to other places. If you don't feel comfortable having a really wide road going in front of your house, how do you think other people feel? And there's a lot of examples of that throughout this plan of widening roads, and that's just something to consider broadly. What is our goal as a community? Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me, sir. Sorry, could you state your name, just for the video and for the written record, can you state your name and city of residence?
Chris Wiltsey.
And you live in Provo? Is that right?
I live in Mazer. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much for the public comment and for your patience. We'll bring it back to the council for discussion. Is there any discussion among the council? Mr. Fillmore.
Yeah, if I might start off, I'd like to ask our engineering people and consultant, obviously, if we were to proceed to widen 800 North, it's going to cause a lot of pain. You know, I mean, I don't think there's any debate on that. But nor is there a debate that we need east-west corridor somewhere. So what are the other options? What other options did you look at, and why did you discard them in favor of 820 North?
The connection of east-west mobility was mentioned several times by our residents of Provo. It is a challenge. 500 North, we've just, in this plan, 500 North from Independence Avenue to 9th East, we recommend going from a collector to a minor arterial to accommodate some of that east-west mobility need. Connecting 500 North across the river, across 3 sets of railroad tracks, and across the I-15 and then connected in at 620 North presents some major challenges. I don't know that we could make that work from an engineering perspective, to be quite honest with you. I think we could try to model that in the next update and see if that improves mobility in the east-west connection. But it was not modeled in this particular plan because of the obvious choke points there that exist between I-15 and the railroad tracks and the river.
And I assume that means your assumption that it would have cost a lot more than what this is projected for on 820.
I didn't put any cost estimates to that. And again, I think all these comments have been very good comments and very concerned. 820 North is one of those projects that we'll know more. It's not going to be built in the next 5, 6, 7 years, right? We'll know more when UDOT's done with their study, and then we can modify and update this plan as well. The funding has been mentioned quite considerable amount. Most of these funds on regionally significant roadways like 820 North come from STP funds. They're called Surface Transportation Fund Program funds. We have, or Provo has, a 7% match, and so that's a 93% match paid by federal and state government. So it is expensive. It is $70 million is a heck of a lot of money, and I appreciate what Chris had to say with active transportation. You know, they don't get funded enough a lot of times. So I will tell you, east-west mobility is a major concern. If you take a look at the phase 1 of the capital facilities plan, there are 14 projects. 10 of them are new roadways to accommodate growth. Most of them are on the west side, not all of them. Others are, there's 4 other roadways that we recommend expanding because of capacity. And we've pulled back on one of those roadways at 2230 North and said, you know, that needs further study. And it does. It needs the boots on the ground study, not the 30,000 foot level study. I think 820 North is going to need that, council member, in the future. They're going to need that boots on the ground study, not the 30,000 foot level.
Oh, for sure. Well, are there any other options? You've mentioned 500 North and 820 North. Is UDOT, for example, looking at any other freeway exchanges between 820 and University Parkway?
They have some concepts that they're going to be looking at over the next 2 years. I don't want to bias the concepts, but I know that there are a whole host of alternatives that they need to look at and that they need to filter out. An EIS study requires a lot of public comment. It requires public input and a large amount of that from the city itself. If I answered that question, I may not have. I apologize if I did.
Well, you gave it a shot.
One of the things on the plan too is we do show a crossing across I-15 at 1680 North. There's that connection that ends now on both sides of the freeway. So it is in the plan to make that connection through the freeway, whether it's overpass, underpass. So yes, there's other things that we have looked at.
Is that in the mix in terms of future potentials?
That is on a phase 2 plan, yes.
I don't want to monopolize this, but one more question. The railroad's not going away. And so you're always going to have that blockage and delay on 820.
And that's one of the unique challenges, obviously, with the railroad, that they're not even close together, that they're, in this area, they're spread apart. And so any solution, I guess, or added crossings across I-15 are going to be very expensive. They're going to be very expensive solutions.
So, I mean, if you're looking at an efficient east-west corridor, the railroad almost precludes that, doesn't it? I mean, how do you deal with that?
From an engineering standpoint, it is very challenging. And I think from engineering's perspective, absolutely, you can look at numerous options of getting across those barriers, but it can come at a very significant cost. And so it all becomes a debate. Cost versus benefit.
Considering a bridge over the tracks?
Absolutely. That would be considerations, absolutely. We do have our partner, our transportation partner, Utah. They would be a part of any process of getting additional connections across I-15. They would be a part of that, and how they would respond to that. You know, that is a federal highway, and they have their requirements as well. So,
one last question, if I might. I'm sorry. The alternative has been suggested that you do away with on-street parking on 820, and that you take advantage of that additional space and create a 3-lane all the way with active transportation options. Is that under active consideration?
Absolutely, and we've done it where when we do overlays, street overlays, we do that all the time. We will take a 2-lane road and that has width and stripe it to a 3-lane road and remove parking. We have done it. One of the recent roads that we have done that in is on 500 West, south of 300 South. It does come at, remove parking, and where we remove parking and we added bike facilities on that.
So that's still a possibility.
Absolutely.
Which would not require taking out homes or anything like that.
Right now, absolutely. I think that'd be a solution that for right now, until at such time where we feel, that we need to make, again, with a bridge, whatever those capacity improvements or those safety improvements that we're talking about need to be completed.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion from the council? Mr. Sewell?
I just had a question. Resident Mr. Howell earlier quoted a traffic count that said in 2003 the traffic on 820 was a little over 9,000 and said that it was about the same or maybe even slightly less today. Can anyone verify that? I mean, because that would say that to me that the traffic count hasn't changed in 17 years. So I just wondered where that came from.
I'm sorry, I don't have that plan in front of me, so I would have to look that
All right,
look
thank
that
you.
up, but I don't have that answer for you right now.
Thank you.
Do you want to? I'll make a comment. I feel reluctant to make these comments because I don't want them to seem disrespectful of the incredible amount of work that's gone on here. And I feel that one of the really uncomfortable things about being in this seat is sort of being the final body that's supposed to make a decision that's already been discussed ad nauseum or ad infinitum, whichever way you want to look at it. Those were Latin phrases for forever or to the point of feeling nauseous for those who want to know. But my point is that I mean, I have a strong bias. I think it's the right bias, and that is that cities ought to be, and I'm sorry that I can't remember who said this, but cities really ought to be planning very, very aggressively to reduce vehicle miles. I think that just has to be a 100% highest priority in any kind of transportation plan, because that has such an effect on our air quality, our quality of life, and it's a major health and safety risk actually to just own an automobile and drive it anywhere. And since safety and health are things that we've been talking a lot about as a city council lately, I just feel strongly that that has to be more prominent in the way that we think about where we're headed. And I think that actually means kind of aggressive planning against the car. I know that's maybe heretical to say in America, but you know, they're just the tendency is for bigger cars and for wider streets. It's just sort of the pervasive mentality, and I feel like that's just kind of a no-win scenario. For one, this has been mentioned by many people, but I don't know what the costs are. I don't know how to plan for the costs of maintenance. I don't know why I should believe that wider roads are going to lead to less traffic. I know they're going to lead to more cars and more vehicle miles, more air pollution. Now, I'm not, in saying all this, I'm not pretending these are easy problems to solve, and I don't. That's why I'm sort of feeling a little squeamish about being too insistent on this point, because I know how much work has gone into this. But I was really pleased to see the active transportation chapter included, and I think that's really fabulous. I guess I was still struggling, and I apologize to Shane and Robert and others that I wasn't asking questions earlier this week. I just had some personal matters that got in the way that didn't make it possible for me to do as much background checking on this. But I know Shane and I talked about 800 North, just south of Provo, or south of BYU campus, because of some pedestrian and bicycle safety issues there. But I'm having a hard time understanding that road, especially when it gets to that point, as a good place to put more cars moving east-west, because it is the heaviest pedestrian crossing, as far as I can tell, north-south anywhere in the city, and it's already very unsafe. So it just seems like that seemed a little bit inconsistent. So in some ways, I'd like to be convinced that I could see more evidence that the active transportation plan is not just included as a chapter, but it's actually sort of pervasively informing the way that the other kinds of plans are going, because I think it's a major decision financially. It's a major decision in terms of health and quality of life to make the decision to widen any street anywhere. And that's not to say we should never do it, or that it's always wrong, and maybe I'm so profoundly anti-car that you think I'm a strange duck, but I do drive occasionally. But I do ride an e-bike, and frankly, I'm convinced that electric bikes and other kinds of means of active transportation are the wave of the future. And maybe that sounds very self-serving to say. Everyone knows I'm trying to proselyte my way of life to everybody else. But my point is not to be obnoxious about it. It's to say that there, in this horse manure example that Brent Hall mentioned, we don't know what's around the corner. And I do think I would rather assume that the paradigm that we're operating with has to go, rather than assume that it has to be accommodated, because the paradigm that we're working with is killing us. It's killing people every day. It's killing, anyway, I hope that doesn't sound too dramatic of a way of putting it, but I mean, we've accommodated the risk of driving cars. We did that a long time ago. We stopped worrying about it. We worry about risks about new things like coronavirus and other kinds of things. But when it comes to getting in a car, we don't think we're taking our lives in our hands, and we don't think we're shortening our lives by driving, and we are. So I think some of that logic I'd like to see. I'm not quite sure where to go at this point, because I don't think it's like it answers the problem by just saying I want to vote to strike this out of the master plan, because that doesn't answer the problems of east-west issues, and it also doesn't address the other streets that have been mentioned that are also being proposed for widening. So it seems to me a really, really complicated problem. But I just know I'm not ready to pass this, and I'm not going to be ready until I feel satisfied that there's a lot more of that kind of vision in the plan, and so that's kind of where I'm at this point. Please, no applause. No.
Can someone pull up page 60 of the Transportation Master Plan? It's figure 4.1. And may I borrow a laser pointer? Thank you. So I'm looking at figure 4.1, major and local street plan. It's a map. It's page 60.
Okay.
It doesn't look like that. Yeah, it'll load. I do appreciate all the work that's been accomplished over the last 2 years by our Public Works Department, by our Planning Department, by our consultants parametrics. I think the city went into this eyes wide open, knowing that we needed to do some planning for transportation. It's a necessity, and obviously we need to do planning for more than just transportation. We need to do planning for land uses, and we need to do planning for really what the values of the city are and what we want to be like when we grow up in 30 or 40 years from now, and even beyond that horizon. So this isn't loading yet. I think we're there. Yeah, that's great. And can you zoom in to South Provo a little bit? There we go, perfect. So here's my concerns, is we've been talking about one road, but this is a transportation network, and it connects all of our city, and all of our city, regardless of where you live, depends on this transportation network. And I think where I'm at now is I'd like to continue it and learn more, and maybe massage a couple of things with our consultant and our public works team and our planning team, because one significant concern I have is 900 South. So I'll turn around and show you. This is 900 South, and this is the railroad tracks. So there's no connectivity from this part of Provo over to like the mall. So if you want to leave this part of Provo and get to the mall, you come down and around, or you go up and through here and around. And this is where I live, and when I want to get to the train station, I have to go up and around and down and over and get to the train station. So what I'd like to see is some opportunities to connect this part of Provo with the rest of Provo, and maybe continue this 9th South Street through. Because right now, 3rd South doesn't go all the way through to West Provo. 6th South doesn't go from State Street all the way through. So can 9th South go through? What opportunities do we have to connect east and west in this part of town? So that's just one connectivity issue that I think hasn't been addressed. And I think that I'd like to continue it and have more of these discussions. Additionally, I don't think that we should throw out the entire transportation master plan over 820 North. I think we can do what most politicians do and punt on hard decisions. and still adopt a good transportation master plan. So, and I would also say that if we do put in some different kind of language around 820 North, it's not necessarily we're going to build a 5-lane road or we're going to keep it exactly the way it is. I think there's some flexibility there. And I hope that the citizens will have good faith and work with this in a transparent way so that they can feel comfortable with the language that we include and that we're not just trying to pacify them with some language that will lull them into a 5-lane road someday in the future, but that we're committed to long-term solutions that are sustainable and safe for everyone.
Yeah, let me just make one point, and that is Mr. Jones reminded me that this is the first time this is being heard on the agenda. Any one council member who desires to have this item continued will automatically be continued, and it sounds like Ms. Ellsworth has already expressed that interest. But I just wanted to clarify that, and also I'm mindful of the time. And we'll maybe stop in 10 minutes and see what you guys want to do. But Mr. Hoban.
Yeah, so if it's going to be continued, another thing, Shane, question for you. If you look at, hey, John, I sent a PDF. Actually, I know I told you to put up the second PDF, but could you put up the first one? If it's not readily available, the second one's fine. So the Center Street exit, if you look at... so go to the second page there, John. Okay, this is fine. If you look at all of the options, so even the 820 North study, you'll notice there at the Center Street exit, whether we do improvements or not, Center Street is red. It's failed, the Center Street exit. John, if you could go up. So this is if we don't do any improvements. That's current. It's failed. Go down, John. I guess that second page. This is even with an interchange at 820 North. You can see Center Street there. I've circled it at the bottom. It's still failed. So I think this is a huge hurdle, and the reason that a lot of pressure is being placed on to 820 is I avoid it. On a personal note, my father-in-law in January got in an accident, got confused at the Center Street exit and passed away 5 days later. So this is not directly related to the accident, but he broke his neck and it ended up complications from that. So to me, this is a huge choke point that's pushing everything up north. I personally avoid it, and I know a lot of people that do. Can you speak to... I know this is a UDOT thing, but man, this is a problem for us, right? Their problem is our problem.
Absolutely. I could say that the Center Street on the west side to Geneva absolutely is a state facility, right? When we start to see this, that's when we did this study. We worked with both MAG and UDOT. Because we are interconnected. So when we did this study, they are made aware of these things. We meet continuously with both UDOT and MAG on a monthly basis.
Is there just too much sunk cost to change how that? I know it feels like people should be able to figure it out, but
there are.
But if you look at a heat map,
it's
the number one place for accidents right now in the city.
Absolutely. And so we have, as part of that interchange, and it's been a concern to the city, and if you show it in our analysis, as far as safety, we have the safety analysis. That is probably glaring. That interchange, specifically the off-ramp on that side is a huge safety problem. And we have brought that to UDOT's attention. And requested whatever happens with the interchange study, that be looked at as well. Because whatever happens with that, it may even make that problem worse. So yes, we have brought that safety issue specifically to the state. As far as Geneva Road, those things, I know the state, it is on there. They're looking at for improvements on Geneva Road to do capacity, safety, those things. They will be doing that. I think they're getting a plan formulated for what that is. That has kind of been produced from some of this what we have done on this master plan, and showing some of the capacity issues that are being presented. So yes, we are in that coordination to look at that as well.
Yeah, I think that would take a lot of pressure off of 820 long term.
And it may, and I think that would be, again, part of this additional study work. As Vern said, not from a 30,000, but now we're going to start diving in a little bit deeper.
Yeah. Appreciate that.
And like I said, UDOT realizes they're going to have a significant capacity issue by 2050, significant. And with those things, they're in the planning process to figure out how they're going to do that. And it will, in some fashion, become a collaborative effort to resolve those concerns. So.
Right. Okay. Another question for you. The Draper Lane, I'm a little confused. So I guess I see where, this isn't critical. Let me ask one other question I do think is more critical, just for time's sake. So why do we need to approve a plan? So let's say this plan has some flaws, some glaring flaws, or whatever. I think we've heard all the opinions tonight. And again, I just really appreciate all the work. And I mean, hey, these are tough decisions to make. You're doing it on limited information and doing the best you can. But why is it important for us to approve a master plan? I know it's required legally. We have to do one. Are we at a deadline? Do we have some time? Does it need to inform other decisions that have to be made now? Is there urgency?
This map is a guiding document, right? Similar, it's a general plan. So it's a general plan for transportation. It helps us so that we plan future projects, future conditions, so that we understand some of the things that will be coming in the future, so that we can get ahead of those. Not be reactionary, but try to get ahead of those. And like you said, there's a lot of land use that is interconnected with this, and the way that we develop and how that happens within the city. So those are highly interconnected.
Well, one thing we discussed as a council recently was we really need to revamp the general plan for the city. I don't know how long that would take, but I'm not saying we punt that long. But, would it be advisable to get the general plan really, solid and updated and before we do this, or do we need to do this?
I would say we need to do this because it's based on the current general plan, right?
Okay.
And so we update, again, those are kind of coincide in sense together. The general plan is, not my area, but that needs to be updated on a 5-year or whatever that is plan as well, which as that plan gets updated, then we take that new information and we do our planning from those land uses changes.
Okay. So we don't need to approve something today, but there is some sense of urgency that we need to approve something to provide some guidance yet.
Yes, we do. We do need to more, and I get it. It's never, I don't think in transportation, it's going to be perfect. Like you said, we can't solve all the problems. We do the best we can with the information that we have, and try to best accommodate, again, all modes of transportation, not just cars, but other modes, whether that's transit and those items. So I want to say, yeah, those are part of the solution, pedestrian facilities, transit, bicycle use, but they aren't the solution. I think there needs to be a culmination of all modes of transportation that's going to help solve some of the population growth we're going to experience. And I have to bring that up because a lot of this is significantly regional. So Provo City, what it shows on the MAG, on their long-range plan in 2050 is that Utah County becomes the size of Salt Lake County. We're going to experience some substantial growth. And so some of those things we're trying to plan for not only just on a local level, but on a regional level to help with those things. So, and it also shows Provo stays one of the biggest employment hubs in the city, or I mean in the county. That employment grows as much as Lehigh City, that their experience. So Provo City is absolutely going to experience that growth, and maybe not necessarily as much as population, but employment is still going to continue. So we have to accommodate those things as well.
Mr. Parker.
No, go ahead.
Just a couple of observations, if I can, just to suggest kind of the importance of doing the master plan. So just to give a little perspective, I arrived in Provo in 2003. I know that seems like an eon ago. Some of you weren't born yet. No, I'm just kidding. But one of the very first meetings I went to was a meeting that was with Senator Bennett, and that was looking at funding for some harebrained idea called the Lakeview Parkway. And we actually secured a $9 million federal grant to do the environmental work and to begin to acquire right-of-way. Well, it's now been 16 years and the road's still not finished. It's had to be built in phases. It's been a very long, convoluted process. Involved a lot of land acquisition, which was very difficult. Road's still not done. That was a road that was envisioned in, right at the turn of the century, and is still not yet complete. Also, in that very first month I was here, I attended my very first meeting with MAG on something that we now refer to as UVX. The first idea of a bus rapid transit was advanced in about 2001. And I got here in 2003, and the project was just completed 2 years ago. So I just want to suggest that the time horizon for planning and executing a significant transportation project is not short. It can take decades, literally, to get from start to finish. And so as we think about needs in 2040, 2040 isn't very far away, at least from my perspective, because it was 20 years ago that we were having these discussions about Lakeview Parkway and BRT. The second thing I'll just mention is just a little anecdote. During the BRT controversy, I had a phone call from a Provo resident who said, "Why do we even need transit? Provo's not going to grow like the rest of the county." And I said, okay, so let me just ask you a question. I said, how many employees are there at Adobe in Lehigh? And he said, I don't know, 20,000? And I said, no, guess again. And he said, I don't know, 15,000. I said, no, how about 3,500? And I said, now, if there's 10 Adobes in Lehigh, let's assume that, there's maybe 30,000 employees. I said, how many employees are there between BYU and UVU? He couldn't answer that question until we looked the number up, and I pointed him to it. It was 27,000 employees between the two institutions. And so we began this discussion around what does population growth in Utah County mean to Provo and Orem? And even though our population will not grow that large, there will be 150,000 people between Saratoga Springs and Eagle Mountain in the 20-year time horizon. They will be together larger than the population of Provo and Orem. And yet, Provo and Orem remains the healthcare center, the education center, the employment center, even in the 2050 horizon. It doesn't leave Provo and Orem. Provo and Orem grows faster economically than the rest of the county does from an employment standpoint. We're the government center, we're the financial center. All of those things mean that despite not having huge population growth in Provo over the next 25 years, the transportation demands will continue to increase. And again, whether 820 North is part of the solution or not, the fact is that more and more people are still going to be coming to Utah Valley Hospital, they're still going to be coming to downtown Provo, they're still going to be coming to BYU, and our partners in Orem, they're still going to be going to UVU, they're still going to be going to University Place. Those are all centers of activity for population. So I just want to make sure you're not just thinking, well, if Provo grows by 20,000 people in the next 20 years, our numbers are going to go up like that. Actually, if you look at the 820 North Corridor study that was finished in 2015, the traffic count on 820 North was expected to go from 11,000 in 2015 to 18,000 in 2040 without an interchange, and to 32,000 if there is an interchange. Now, 32,000 is a pretty substantial roadway. I mean, it's University Parkway, right? I mean, it's a very large. So again, even without substantial population growth, we have to make hard transportation decisions. I totally agree with Councilmember Handley that it makes all the sense in the world to try to figure out how to reduce vehicle miles traveled, but with rapid population growth, it's a geometric challenge to try to see a net decrease in vehicle miles traveled. Now again, capacity increases can include transit. Capacity increases can include HOV lanes. Capacity increases can involve a lot of things that we might consider. So there are lots of solutions, but I don't want you to think that the problem goes away. If the traffic doesn't happen on 820 North or 900 South or 2230 North, the traffic will go somewhere. And even if we encourage more active transportation, more transit, we're still going to fight the challenge. So again, I think it's important to know that we are trying to think 20, 30, 40 years down the road.
Did you have a comment?
I do have a comment. Good planning is critical, especially with the growth that we're seeing. So much of Utah's growth and economic growth is centered right here in Utah Valley. Without Utah Valley, the state lags behind like 10 other states in economic growth. But to do good planning, we need good data. So my plea to the public and anyone listening at home or later is to take the census and encourage your neighbors to take the census and encourage your cousins to take the census and encourage every BYU student you come in contact with to take the census. That's all.
Mr. Sewell.
I appreciated Wayne's mention of the interchange and what a big effect that has on traffic. I hope that we get some feedback from UDOT as to what the best way to do that is, because it seems to me we have to take that into account in planning for capacity on these different roads. I hope they strongly look at something that could possibly spread out the east-west load, like some kind of collector system. I mean, not knowing all the technical details, that just seems to make a lot of sense to me, to have 3 or 4 or 5 places to dump that traffic. I just wanted to express appreciation for all who have participated in the process here and express your feelings. I think the Bartholomew family set a couple of records for me in constituent communication, most emails from one family, and youngest constituent communication, and I just thought it was cool. Anyway, thank you. This really affects people's lives. I'm not convinced at this point that we can say that a 5-lane road would be needed or when it would be needed. So I appreciate the suggested change in the language to capacity, looking at capacity and safety. And if we're not comfortable that it does the trick, I'd be willing to support the language that Wayne suggested and that Mr. Fillmore requested, to at least on that road where the impact would be so huge, to bring that back to the council before we make a final decision on that. So,
Thank you. Any other comments from the council? We have a request to have the item continued. Our next meeting is in 3 weeks. Am I remembering that correctly? I would counsel each of us to spend some more time with the plan and maybe talking with those of you who've done so much work in preparing it, talking more with constituents, and then we'll come back again in 3 weeks to try to tackle it more definitively. We're also missing Mr. Harding, who had to leave early, so I think if for no other reason, I would prefer to wait to have him back, because we haven't heard from him either. So All right, if there are no other comments, then that means that if there's no objection, we will now adjourn the Provo Municipal Council meeting by unanimous. Oh, excuse me. I had one more word to say. You almost.
Before then, is there anything specifically, as this gets continued, is there anything specifically that you would like us to look at?
I can send you a list with some edits, but off the top of my head, some connectivity at 9th South and improvements, safety improvements around 1860 South. But I'll send you some more. Thanks.
I can do the same. I'll send you an email, Shane.
Mine might be more philosophical and need more conversation, so. All right. If there's no objection, we will now adjourn the Provo Municipal Council meeting by unanimous consent. Thank you very much for being here.